There was chaos all around. Among the collapsed buildings stood a huge monster with purple skin and a skeletal back, from which eerie shadows emanated. Fear and panic filled the streets, but only one lonely guy stands motionless and does not try to run away. People looked at the monster with horror in their eyes and could not understand what was happening. The guy's eyes also sparkled with surprise and fear, looking at the gloomy sight in front of him. His gaze widened in amazement and turned upward. Suddenly, the guy felt that something was happening to his cheek. He looked at it in surprise and saw glowing cracks. Sensing something else, his gaze, full of incomprehension and horror, slid down over his shoulder. His arm was covered in hundreds of cracks, and they were gradually making their way towards his body, as if he was about to explode. Panic gripped the boy. His eyes widened and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. With a quick movement, he fell to the floor, his gaze feverishly running over his body. The boy's scream echoed everywhere as hundreds of cracks began to tear him apart from the inside, causing him hellish pain. In a moment, everything became quiet. Only a small purple ball of energy sparkled against the blue sky. Gradually, it faded away, sinking downwards. The ball slowly approached the face of the guy who was lying unconscious. The energy object carefully entered the guy's head, disappearing forever into the depths of his consciousness. The dark-haired man's eyes suddenly opened wide and his mouth opened slightly, swallowing more air. Clutching the sheet in his fingers, he was still trying to comprehend that this was just a nightmare. The guy slowly sat up on his bed, his black bangs falling slightly over his eyes. He turned to the large panoramic window, trying to finally come to his senses. Echoes of a dream flashed through his memory. The brain was still drawing scary pictures consisting of scary, scaly monsters, under whose feet the city burned with red flame. Panic swept the streets. Everyone ran, terrified, past buildings that were drowning in flames. Some people soared upward like a light feather, and white lightning sparkled around them. Not understanding what was happening, the crowd of people froze in place, watching as others floated in the air. The guy was brought out of his dark memories by a sharp knock on the door. The dark-haired man looked back sharply at the sound, hearing a female voice after asking, "Brother, did it work? Did you awaken your talent?" The guy's thoughtful gaze turned downwards to the palm in which lay the black stone. The surface of the stone was decorated with two bright patterns that looked like circles. From it, a straight bright lightning flashed, and then the inscription, "Low-level talent," appeared. The guy exhaled deeply, closing his eyes, and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. "If I don't become a warrior, how can I protect my little sister?" he thought. And the black stone fell with a dull thud onto his bare feet. The dark-haired man lowered his head, hunching his back. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a girl entered the room with a smile on her face. Her eyes, seemingly without blinking, looked at her brother, and she herself froze in anticipation, timidly asking, "Well, what?" The girl folded her palms into a lock, pressing them to her chest and shifting from foot to foot, asked again, "What is the result?" Without raising his head, the guy grinned and replied, "Excellent, of course." As soon as the sister heard these words, her eyes seemed to shine and, not believing her ears, she asked again, "Really?" An awkward smile touched the boy's lips and he quietly replied, "Don't worry, I will definitely become the strongest warrior." The girl jumped high into the air, tucking her legs under her and screaming loudly with joy, "I knew it, my older brother is the best." The guy's face reflected bewilderment, seeing such a happy sister, while the girl said with a wide smile, "Let's go! I made your favorite dish. We need to celebrate the awakening." Just as the brother was about to follow his sister, a pop-up window with inscriptions appeared in front of him. The guy's eyes widened in surprise, looking at the window that appeared in front of him. He froze in place, while his sister, unable to see anything in front of her, put her hands on her hips and said loudly, "What are you waiting for? Move!" It was a status window that had the words, "Human, Nicole. Enhancement talent, low. Freezing talent, low, not awakened." The dark-haired man's eyes grew even wider. He stretched his palm forward, still not believing what was happening. The status window shook sharply, blurring into the air. It glowed blue again, but the inscription changed to Human Nicholas. Talent for excellence, low level. The guy looked up, looking at the window in surprise. Suddenly, his sister's hand grabbed his wrist, stopping his attempt to touch the status window. Nicole dragged her brother along with her, shouting, "Come on! The food will get cold." She quickly walked forward while Nicholas, slightly confused, tried not to trip over his feet. Two hands clasped together suddenly glowed with a purple light. The status window appeared before the guy's eyes again. It read, Human, Nicole. Enhancement. Talent. Low. Freezing talent. Low, can be copied. Nicholas's breathing became ragged. Can I copy it? How? Flashed through his mind. His fingertips trembled, his lips pressed into a thin line, and his eyes continued to stare forward at the inscription. Do you want to copy talents? Yes or no? After a while, Nicole placed the plate on the kitchen table, a wonderful, inviting aroma emanating from it. This is only a small part of what the girl could cook. She loved to spoil her brother with various dishes. Nicholas took the chopsticks in his hands and sat down at the table, starting to eat. Doubts were swirling around in the guy's head, preventing him from enjoying his breakfast to the fullest. Copying talents is an amazing ability, but I can't try it on my sister. I'll have to click no. Her main talent is better than mine. Freezing is extremely rare. The dark-haired man closed his eyes, chewing on pieces of rice, trying to throw bad thoughts out of his head. Mom, Dad, he thought, looking back. If you're watching us, then you can rest easy. On one of the shelves, there were 2 photographs of the deceased parents. Closer to lunchtime, modern high-rise buildings were already shining in the rays of the sun. Nick's blue sneaker landed on the asphalt, raising a cloud of dust around it. People walked past him quickly, hurrying about their business. The guy cast an indifferent glance at the passers-by around him, but then suddenly stopped, frowning. Purple rings of energy flashed forward like locators. Nicholas scanned every person in his path, but the status window only showed one low-level talent. These talents are no good for anything, the dark-haired man muttered under his breath and continued on his way. With his head down and staring at his feet, he walked forward with a languid, almost thoughtful gait. In an instant, his red eyes looked up and his lips stretched into a sly smile. I have an idea. Nicholas sat, a fast pace headed towards the ancient gate leading to a stone building with the inscription, 5th Linhai Academy. He looked thoughtfully at all the warriors who were coming out from there. A sly smile touched the corners of his lips again. His fingers gently touched his cheek, and the thought ran through his head. Thanks to my talent, I will surely become the strongest of all here. 10 days later, the Academy's stone courtyard was surrounded by arches and crenellated walls. In the very middle of it, in the lotus position, sat a man, his face distorted with tension, his hands clenched into fists. Nicholas was also sitting in the lotus position, and on his chest was the purple uniform of the Academy. Teacher, a couple of people have fainted, one of the students shouted, pointing to the people lying on the ground. The man's answer was not long in coming. He said loudly, Don't pay attention to these nobodies. You only have a chance to become warriors if you can concentrate your energy. Nick frowned and beads of sweat appeared on his face. The teacher crossed his arms over his chest and looked at the students, his gaze lingering on the boy, and quickly said, That's enough for today? You really are the worst students I've ever taught. The man raised his eyebrows and grinned sarcastically, throwing out a parting shot of, Take an example from Ben. Hearing this name, Nicholas, as if struck, suddenly opened his eyes and stared after the departing coach. After training, Nicholas walked with his new friend along the fountain, looking around the Academy's grounds. Ben is not simple. He became a student in half a month, and now he is being personally trained by the head of the Academy. Greg rattled off, running his eyes over Nick's thoughtful face. The new friend, with a mischievous smile on his face, put his hand in his pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, and began waving it in front of the guy's nose. On this sheet of paper, a bright and captivating painting of that very Ben stretched out. Greg smiled smugly, as if he was holding a gold bar in his hand and not an ordinary autograph. Nicholas, embarrassed and slightly confused, tried to force an awkward smile, as if he thought that it would somehow smooth over the awkwardness of the moment, since he had no idea what to say in response. Not far from the guys, a crowd formed, raising their hands in the air, shouting, It's Ben! Look faster! Ben has arrived. They, without waiting for the noise to die down, instantly turned their heads in the direction of the screams, full of curiosity and bewilderment. In the very center of this crowd of people stood a fair-haired guy who, with a joyful smile on his face, waved his hand in a friendly manner. Suddenly, Greg ran forward, shouting, Ben, sign for me one more time, leaving Nicholas standing alone. As soon as he noticed the blonde, the guy narrowed his eyes slyly and smiled, showing his snow-white teeth in a sinister grin. Ben, with a cheerful smile on his face, nods vigorously to everyone who approaches him. His status window clearly showed that he had a mid-level talent, which meant that he was already experienced and had gone through many trials. Nicholas, his hands clenched into fists so that his knuckles were white with tension, with determination in his eyes, walked towards Ben. Ben, slightly flushed with embarrassment and with an embarrassed smile on his face, muttered, Okay, guys, calm down. Greg, tripping over his own feet and looking completely awkward, quickly walked towards the blonde man, trying to hide his shy trepidation and nervous excitement. Nick, with a smile on his face and his hand extended forward, asked eloquently, "Can I shake your hand?" There was a long line of people in front of Ben, eager to shake his hand and express their admiration. A proud smile spread across his face as he heard the people around him gushing with admiration. "Buddy, it's your turn," Ben said relaxedly, holding out his hand to Nick. The dark-haired guy slowly lowered his gaze to his palm, as if trying to discern something important in it. A grin immediately appeared on his face, making it clear that he had already planned something. In an instant, their palms touched, and a purple glow flashed between them, so bright that it seemed as if they had touched electricity itself. Nicholas, at the moment he touched Ben's left hand, copied his talent for self-improvement, and then quickly pulled his hand back. The blonde man shook hands with a couple more people and hurried away, waving his hand one last time. "It worked!" flashed joyfully through Nick's mind, and he couldn't help but smile. By evening, the weather had become so bad that a real storm broke out outside the window. Thunder rumbled and rain poured down, flooding everything around. There was a status window in front of the guy's eyes, and it displayed the question, "Mid-level cultivation talent successfully copied. Start merging? Yes or no?" Nick, sitting on the hard ground in the cold and gloomy cave, stared thoughtfully at one point. He unconsciously ran his fingers over his chin, and suddenly vague echoes of the terrible nightmare that had been haunting him surfaced in his head. That same scream that echoed and hundreds of cracks tore him apart from the inside, causing hellish pain. "What did it mean?" Nick asked, staring into space, but no answer came. He looked back at the status window where the button was blinking and, gathering his thoughts, he pressed yes with determination. The dark-haired guy, having settled comfortably on the damp ground, crossed his arms in front of him and completely relaxed. A sharp pain shot through Nick's body. His palm quickly dropped to his chest and lightly squeezed the fabric of his uniform. Unable to bear the unbearable pain any longer, Nicholas screamed, throwing his head back. Suddenly, he fell sharply to his knees, pressing his palms to the ground. His fingertips scraped the wet surface, pushing dirt under his nails. "It hurt like hell," Nick said through clenched teeth. The weather outside simply got worse beyond belief. The sky became even darker, and lightning tore it apart. The pain receded, and Nick could breathe deeply. Beads of sweat were visible on his face, and his mouth was slightly open in an attempt to catch at least some fresh air. His eyes quickly moved upward, noticing his status window. Human, Nicholas, cultivation talent, average. As soon as the guy read these lines, his face suddenly lit up with a wide smile. His status window suddenly became foggy and blurry with one easy movement. A new one appeared in front of the guy, which read, "Copy talent cooldown, 30 days. His eyes widened in surprise as soon as he finished reading the inscription. Taking a deep breath, he sat more comfortably in the lotus position and closed his eyes, muttering under his breath, "I'll do the exercise that the teacher showed us." In front of him, in an instant, the glowing lines swirled together into one small ball, resembling a clot of energy. Nicholas's eyes were filled with admiration, and he exclaimed, "With an average talent, doing the exercise is easy." Rising from the cold ground, he walked slowly towards the exit of the cave. A victorious smile played across his face as drops of rain fell on his face. A month later, when night fell upon the city, a huge full moon shone in the sky, illuminating the streets. Like a shadow, a huge monster, reminiscent of a wolf with its massive paws and fierce eyes, swept over the rooftops. He bared his teeth, growled with impatience, and looked greedily for his prey. At that moment, a little girl was slowly walking down a quiet street, holding tightly to her father's big warm hand. As he passed them, Nicholas was deep in thought, clutching the lantern tightly in his hand and looking at his feet. There was a loud splashing sound down the street, and then something fell heavily onto the asphalt. The man didn't even have time to squeak before the huge monster grabbed his face with its sharp fangs. Nicholas turned around at the sound, and his eyes widened as he saw the man's corpse and the monster nearby. "Daddy!" the blonde girl screamed, looking at her father's lifeless body. The beast turned sharply towards her, scratching the asphalt with its sharp claws, preparing to attack. Nick began to get nervous, and beads of sweat began to shine on his forehead. When passers-by saw this terrible monster, their hearts sank into their heels, and panic engulfed the streets. People were screaming and running in different directions. Only the dark-haired one looked at the shaggy monster in fascination, because he had never seen them outside the academy. The beast growled quietly, and bright red blood dripped from its mouth. In an instant, he rushed forward, opening his huge mouth, revealing sharp teeth. Without thinking twice, Nicholas quickly pressed the girl to himself. protecting her from the monster's attack. "He's too fast, I can't escape," the boy thought, shuffling his legs, running away. From somewhere above, a man with a red cloak landed on the ground. His greatsword came down with a loud bang, and the stone slabs on the street were cut into two pieces. The shockwave tried to knock the beast off its feet, but it dug its claws into the asphalt, leaving small indentations. The man's gaze was riveted on the bright red eyes of the monster, which sparkled in the darkness like two hot coals. "Sorry for the delay," he said, a grin playing across his face. "Who are you?" Nick shouted, still holding the girl in his arms. "Everyone calls me Captain Windwolf," the man replied. He turned around and looked at the dark-haired man, throwing him an order. "Leave the Silver Moon Wolf to me and you protect the girl." "Got it," Nicholas replied, hugging the blonde tighter. The captain quickly ran towards the wolf, leaving behind a ball of dust. He swung his sword, raising it over the beast's head. Nick placed his palm over the girl's eyes, blocking her view of the fight, and quickly muttered, "Don't look." "He's strong, the bastard," the captain croaked, clenching his jaws, and his eyebrows drew together so tightly that it seemed his forehead was about to fold into three folds. The sword struck the wolf with a dull sound, sending it flying back several meters. The beast did not retreat. He began to quickly walk around the warrior, raising a cloud of dust around him. The captain, squeezing the hilt of his sword so hard that his fingers turned white with tension, swung it again, aiming straight at the wolf's heart. "I'm not alone," the man said through clenched teeth, and several martial artists dropped to the ground. The monster, breathing heavily, looked at the warriors, assessing his chances of victory. All the masters took their swords and clubs and, with fire in their eyes, rushed towards the beast. The ferocious monster, with fury, threw off the warriors with one powerful movement, and, bending in the air, swiftly jumped straight to the captain, preparing to deliver the decisive blow. "Captain!" shouted one of the masters, pointing at the huge wolf. The beast approached the warrior with quick and confident steps, its muscles tensing with every step. The man suddenly pulled out his sword, gripping the hilt tightly, and assumed a defensive stance. The monster pushed off the ground and with a wild roar rushed at the dark-haired man, his huge paws threateningly swinging in the air. The martial artists rushed to their captain's aid, clutching their weapons tighter. In an instant, several swords plunged into the beast, leaving behind a splash of blood and a bright gleam of metal. "Is he dead?" asked one of the masters, removing his weapon from the body. Suddenly, the monster's claws began to rapidly lengthen, sparkling in the rays of the full moon. The fur suddenly flared up bright red, and from the depths of the mouth such a powerful roar burst forth that passers-by got goosebumps. "Watch out! The monster has entered a bloody flash state," Captain Windwolf shouted, warning the others. With one blow, the ferocious beast knocked back one martial artist, leaving a bloody stain on his chest. "Captain, how are you?" asked Nick, who was still standing nearby. "Fine," the man shouted back. When the wolf saw that he was in trouble, he rushed out of the encirclement, wanting to run away into the distance. "He's running away!" Nicholas pointed his finger at the beast. The wolf crossed the streets with quick steps, leaving a trail of blood behind him. "Don't worry, it won't run away," said the captain, watching the beast. A mysterious female silhouette suddenly appeared on the roof of one of the houses. The girl, confidently holding a bow in her hands, was also one of the masters. Her light fingers released the bowstring, and the arrow flew with a whistle towards the monster. The arrow, fired with incredible accuracy, flew straight into the beast's eye. By the time he noticed the shiny metal tip, it was too late. The arrow struck the wolf, and as he let out a final hoarse howl, bright sprays of his blood flew around. Then there was a bang, and the monster fell to the ground, completely exposing its figure. The captain laughed quietly, showing his snow-white teeth. "You're still too weak to compete with us." The martial artists crowded around the silver moon wolf, which was a meter long, had sharp claws and red eyes. Nicholas's eyebrows rose when he noticed the status window popping up. "Are these the monster's talents?" Nick thought as he read the text. "Monster, silver moon wolf. Blood talent, low. Speed talent, basic." His face was blank as he scanned the lines on the status window over and over again. The girl next to Nick folded her palms into a lock and pressed them to her breasts, looking at the masters with fascination. Suddenly, a clawed paw fell on the asphalt, leaving deep scratches. Despite the fact that the animal was badly wounded and death was already close, it still rose to its feet, breathing heavily. The first to notice the monster was Captain Windwolf, and he shouted loudly to his companions, "Hey you! Watch out!" The martial artists quickly turned around at the shout, confusion evident on their faces. The silver moon wolf, wagging its tail, slowly approached the warriors. His loud roar echoed throughout the city, shaking the earth. "Captain, what should we do?" one of the masters shouted, pointing his weapon forward. "Don't worry, the creature is pretty weak, leave it to me," Captain Windwolf shouted and looked behind him, adding, "Hey boy, it's not safe here, get out of here with the girl immediately." Nick stood rooted to the spot, his mouth open and his eyes wide open, unable to tear his gaze away from the silver-mooned wolf. Then a sly smile appeared on his face, and the thought flashed through his head. This is a great opportunity. Nicholas, in the blink of an eye, rushed past the captain, leaving behind only a light breeze. He swung his fist, cutting through the air around him. The blow hit the beast's face and it whined quietly. The touch was only for a second, but it was enough for the monster's talent to be successfully copied. Nick's fist flared with a bright white light, like 100 lightning bolts. The guy deftly turned over in the air, doing a backflip. Nicholas landed on the beast's back, riding it as if it were a horse. He clenched his fists and raised them high above his head, demonstrating his strength. A second later, they landed on the wolf's back with a powerful blow. There was a loud crunch of bones and splashes of blood flew in all directions. 2 drops of blood fell on Nick's cheek, leaving scarlet marks on his pale skin. The boy's bloody fist shot up again. "Enough! He's dead!" Captain Windwolf shouted and grabbed the dark-haired man by the wrist. Nicholas exhaled heavily and quickly ran his gaze over the bloodstain on the wolf's fur. The dark-haired man removed his second palm from the beast's body, and drops of blood slowly flowed down it. "Okay, we need to clean up here," the captain shouted to his partners. The man nodded to the woman on his team at the blonde girl and added, "And you take care of the girl." Captain Windwolf put his sword on his shoulder and turned to Nicholas. Smiling, he said, "Thank you for your help, boy. I will be very glad to see you in my company when you become a warrior." The guy nodded a couple of times and replied with a happy smile, "Got it." Nick got home only in the evening when the sun was setting over the horizon. Turning the tap, the dark-haired man stuck his bloody hands under the hot water. While washing his face, the guy washed away traces of blood from his hands and face. The mirror in the bathroom was fogged up from the heat and humidity. Nicholas lifted his face above the sink, and a couple of drops slowly rolled down his skin. Washing away the traces of the furious fight, he placed his palm on the door handle. The door creaked open, and Nicholas walked slowly into the living room. Hearing a quiet snore, the dark-haired man turned towards the sound. Nicole slept on a small mattress, placing her palms under her head. "Brother," the girl whispered sleepily, and the corners of her lips twitched. Hearing this, Nick also smiled a soft, kind smile. On the kitchen table, there were already a couple of fragrant dishes that my sister had managed to prepare. The dark-haired man didn't even touch them. Instead, he took a blanket out of the closet. Carefully, he covered his sister with it, wrapping her like a cocoon. Nicole, without waking up, settled more comfortably on the mattress, hugging the warm blanket to herself. To avoid waking his sister, Nicholas quietly entered his room. In the palm of his right hand, he held a towel folded in half. Slowly and tiredly, the dark-haired guy sank down onto the bed. Suddenly, a status window popped up in front of him. Nick's eyebrows drew together and he squinted his eyes to get a better look at the hologram in front of him. Rereading the lines over and over again, he thought, "This will most likely be more painful than last time. Maybe even mortally dangerous." But the decision was made. Nicholas, clutching the crumpled towel in his hand, pressed it to his lips and opened his mouth. He clenched the cloth tightly between his teeth, and at that very moment the copying began. From the unbearable pain, the dark-haired man bit into the towel, and his eyes opened wide. Unable to contain himself, he collapsed to the floor, bracing himself with his palms. His nails dug into the wooden boards, leaving long marks. There was a buzzing in his head, and the veins in his arms bulged as if they were about to burst. Suddenly, his legs seemed to come to life, starting to convulse, as if someone invisible was sharply pulling its strings. There is a sharp crunch of bones, and the foot flies off, leaving behind a fountain of blood. Nicholas screamed so loudly that the cloth he was holding in his teeth flew out of his mouth. With fear in his eyes, the dark-haired man slowly looked around and saw only a bloody stain in front of him. Did the copying fail? The guy thought, gulping air. His heart was pounding, and beads of sweat were appearing on his forehead, as if he had just run a marathon. The image of his sleeping sister suddenly appeared in his head like a bright flash, so vivid and real that he could almost hear her quiet breathing. "Nicole!" Nicholas shouted, and in an instant everything changed. The room became as bright as day again. The guy sat up in bed, looking around, trying to figure out where he was now. "What happened?" the dark-haired man whispered, and looked first at his palms and then at his legs. Everything was in place. With a quick movement, his leg rose up. "Wow, the body is light as a feather!" Nicholas exclaimed, laughing happily. The guy was shocked. He looked at the status window that appeared in front of him. It read, "Human. Nicholas. Enhancement. Talent, intermediate. Speed. Talent, basic. A couple of days later, in the grove of the 5th Academy, the sound of footsteps was heard. Nick moved his feet quickly, leaving only dust behind him. He rushed through the trees like lightning. With just one jump, he soared high into the air. His eyes glowed with fire as he levitated above the treetops. A happy smile quickly formed on his face. Nick slid smoothly down, his boots barely touching the surface of the rocks. Having miscalculated his strength, he fell to the ground with a crash, leaving a hole and cracks beneath him. Among the other debris that rose up, Nicholas noticed a green leaf. Pushing off the ground with force, Nick began to run. The leaf slowly fell to the ground, hovering in the air, and in the blink of an eye, it lands on the guy's palm. Nicholas sharply squeezes his palm, crumpling the piece of paper in his fingers. The dark-haired man deftly moved onto a large boulder. He took a deep breath and sat down in the lotus position, crossing his legs. The guy closed his eyes, placing his palms on his knees. Suddenly, a painfully familiar voice rang out. "Nick!" It was Greg. Nicholas smiled and opened his eyes, nodding to his friend in greeting. Greg looked the guy over from head to toe, assessing his appearance. "Wow, you're so strong, you've already become a student." The guy laughed and patted Nick on the shoulder. Then, the dark-haired man leaned over and quietly whispered, "Do you know how you can become even stronger in a short time?" Nicholas laughed, answering, "And how?" Greg grinned and looked at his friend, also throwing out, "Ever tried monster blood?" Logically, he shook his head. "I'll tell you frankly, I advanced faster than you because I drank it." The guy's tone became ominous, as if he was trying to tell some kind of horror story. Nicholas's eyes widened and he groaned softly, mentally kicking himself in the ass as he remembered that he had missed out on the silver moonwolf's blood. Greg raised his finger to get attention and quickly said, "There's one way to get her. Are you interested?" The dark-haired man immediately perked up and shouted, "You keep asking! Tell me!" Greg grinned and cleared his throat, beginning his story. The leadership of the Linhai Academy has unofficially established a zone outside the city, which is used to hold the exams of the 5 academies. The main prize for passing is the blood of a monster. "What level is it?" Nicholas interrupted him, stopping the guy's flow of words. "Quite low. The beasts there were exterminated long ago. Only their subspecies, the monsters, remain." Greg answered, shrugging. Nick thoughtfully placed his fingers to his chin, trying to collect his thoughts into a coherent whole. "While we're on the subject, would you like to join my team and get blood together?" Greg lightly tapped the dark-haired man on the shoulder. "Join your team?" "I don't even know," Nicholas drawled sarcastically. Greg cried out indignantly, pointing at the guy. "Hey! What do you mean I don't know? I told you this because you're my good friend." Nick smirked as he replied, "Sorry, I'll join you next time." Amidst his friend's muttering, the dark-haired man moved forward. "Nick, wait! Even if you don't join, we'll still be friends. Wait for me!" Greg shouted to the whole area and quickly shook hands with his friend. Nicholas seemed not to hear him, walking forward thoughtfully. A month later, the sun rose over the 5th Academy. In the office, the director looked at the guy with displeasure, folding his arms across his chest. "I'm already a student and have every right to enroll," Nick said indignantly, looking at the man. The director grinned, but it was a rather sinister grin. "I just wanted you to live sensitively a little longer," he replied calmly, and stood up from his desk, pushing back his chair. "But you, no matter how I look at it, are eager to die." A piece of paper flies into Nicholas's face. The dark-haired man winces and, puffing, bends down to pick up the piece of paper. It said, "Death Waiver Agreement." The detector brought a cup of tea to his lips and added, "That's right. If you want to take part in the exam, you need to sign this paper." "That's it," Nick muttered over and over, his eyes running down the line, "Death Waiver Agreement." "If you're afraid of dying, get lost. Don't waste my time," the director suddenly shouted. Nicholas looked up, glaring at the man, his gaze burning right through him. The dark-haired man walked quickly along the corridor, weaving between the students. A satisfied smile shone on his face, already anticipating what would happen next. As soon as he entered the director's office, a piece of paper with a signature landed on his desk, stating that he agreed to participate in the exam. The door closed behind the guy. The director took a deep breath and walked over to the panoramic window, whispering, "Do the brats seriously think this will be a regular exam?" The corners of his lips turned up, revealing his snow-white teeth, and he added, "I hope they don't regret it later." Meanwhile, in Nicholas's hometown, Nicole slowly sat up, still trying to wake up. She rubbed her eyes with her fist, washing away the last remnants of sleep. Her bare foot landed on the wooden floor and she walked slowly into the kitchen. She rubbed and squeezed her neck with her palms. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the dishes standing on the table and ran up to them. But instead of fragrant dishes, the first thing she picked up was a note. This note was from Nick, where he wrote in a clumsy handwriting, "There is an event at the academy. I will return in 3 days." Nicole exhaled sadly and only one question popped into her head. Will everything be okay with him? The 5th Academy, martial arts training ground number 5, was a rather gloomy place. Crows were flying everywhere, only adding to the tension in the atmosphere. The buildings kept creaking loudly, as if they were about to collapse. When Nicholas arrived, he saw about 100 participants, but that was clearly not all. In a remote corner, the team of the 5th Academy had gathered, and the guy was heading towards it. Quite a lot of people showed up, Nick said, looking around the training ground. Of course. All 5 academies took part. Greg responded cheerfully, approaching his friend. Students of the 5th Academy? A smile played on the long-haired guy's face. Were the worthless ones allowed to participate in the upcoming exam? Next to him stood a tall man with blonde hair. Most likely it was his bodyguard, because the guy was dressed in a beautiful red suit, which spoke of his status. Sir, during the exam, you can hunt both animals and participants. The fewer weaklings, the better. The guard's rough voice rang out. The dark-haired man laughed quietly and looked at the students of the 5th Academy again. Greg still wouldn't let up, telling Nick about the other students. His finger jerked sharply towards the long-haired man and he said, "See that guy? That's Darren, the genius of the 1st Academy. In his family, he is the strongest of the younger generation." Nick looked at Darren and chuckled, quietly saying, "Ah, so he's from the 1st Academy, then it's no wonder he's so arrogant." Suddenly, there was the sound of a ball scraping on the asphalt. Many of the students turned around, and Darren and his guard followed suit. The heel hit the ground with such a loud sound that the guy attracted even more attention. "Darren, come here, I'll stab you to death," he shouted loudly. The long-haired man only smirked at such a threat and calmly said, "You again? I kicked your ass 10 times, aren't you tired of it yet?" A grin spread across the guy's face. The loud cries caused the crows to fly over the training ground. "Who is he?" Nick asked, looking at the guy in surprise. Greg frowned and said quietly, as if afraid that he would be heard, "This is Wright, the genius swordsman of the 2nd Academy, who has been fighting Darren several times in the past." The principal noticed the tension between the students, clicked his tongue, and spat saliva on the ground. "Completely detached from life," he shouted, looking at everyone who was now in front of him. Nicholas shrugged nervously, meeting the director's gaze. Come on, Wright, I believe in you," Nick suddenly shouted, raising his hands up. Wright, in turn, looked at the dark-haired man with an uncomprehending look. A mechanical voice came from the loudspeaker. "Fights outside the wilderness zone are prohibited. Violators will be disqualified." "You're lucky," Wright growled through his teeth. He quickly twisted the sword in his fingers. "As soon as we get into the zone, I won't leave a single living place on you." He turned around and walked away from Darren. The student of the 1st Academy only laughed loudly. Wright stamped his foot, stopping next to the students of the 5th Academy. "Hey boy, I see you're brave since you dared to encourage me in front of Darren. Name yourself." He put his hands on his hips, looking at the guys in front of him. "Nicholas, from the 5th Academy," the boy answered in a calm voice. Wright's eyes widened and he let out a soft gasp. "What a good name, a leaf blocking the sun. Where have you ever seen such a thing?" His eyes slightly opened in surprise. A window of Wright's status popped up in front of Nick, where his qualities were written human, Wright. Talent for accomplishment, low level. Talent for fencing, average level. The dark-haired man looked at the status window and a wonderful thought was born in his head. He extended his hand forward. "I hope you bring Darren to the exam," Nicholas said with a grin on his face. Wright first looked at the guy's outstretched palm in surprise and then nodded with satisfaction. "Good luck to you too. Survive there." The guy also extended his palm. Their hands touched and a pleasant vibration passed through Nick's palm. The status window changed to "Fencing talent successfully copied." The loudspeaker again blared a mechanical voice. "The exam has begun." 2 large men began to push the large wooden gate, and the voice from the loudspeaker said again, "Students from the 1st Academy, come in." The students, wearing red uniforms, quickly rushed towards the opening gates. And the first one to come out of the gate was none other than Darren, with his guard. His gaze was determined. He had no intention of retreating. Finally, "The exam has begun," Greg exclaimed joyfully and placed his weapon on his shoulder. "I'm going to my team." "See you later, Nicholas," Wright said, watching Greg run as fast as he could towards the gate. Nick nodded. The guy stretched and groaned, adding, "First the first academy, then ours, the second, and you, the fifth academy, are starting last? Yeah, I don't envy you." Wright waved his hand one last time and walked away to his team. Nicholas just rolled his eyes at his statement. A couple of hours later, the dark-haired man was already running quickly through the dark forest. His gaze was focused. He made quick movements, pushing off from large tree trunks and jumping long distances. In a remote part of the forest, he landed on the ground, throwing the backpack off his shoulders. The status window lit up in front of him again, and on it were the words, "Intermediate-level swordsmanship talent successfully copied. Start fusion?" As soon as Nick pressed the word yes, his hand tensed and the veins stood out. Nicholas even heard the crunch of bones, but it was no longer so painful. He clenched his teeth harder and just waited. Soon the pain took its toll. The guy collapsed to the ground, pressing his palms into the damp earth. The veins on his face also bulged from the tension. Suddenly, a loud sound was heard throughout the forest, and a second later, everything became quiet. Nicholas exhaled and opened his eyes, feeling relieved. His hand immediately grabbed the handle of the ball. With a whistle, the sword left the case that was hanging in the boy's bosom. With just one movement, Nick cut through several large trees in his path. With a loud thud, they fell to the ground, leaving behind only gnarled stumps and dust. Nick checked his talent status, which now read Human, Nicholas. Enhancement. Talent, Intermediate. Speed. Talent, Basic. Swordsmanship. Talent, Intermediate. Smiling at his small victory, he slung his backpack over his shoulder again and moved on. The loudspeaker again announced, "The first 4 academies have entered the zone. Next, the 5th academy." The students of the 5th academy resolutely headed towards the large wooden gates. Nicholas walked along an empty road, with only black crows flying around him. His boot hit the ground and a stick crunched under his feet. The guy didn't pay any attention to this and continued on his way. Suddenly, behind the dark-haired man, there was a quiet rustling sound, similar to someone dragging a bag along the asphalt. Without thinking twice, Nick pulled out his sword. Turning around, he saw a huge snake in front of him. It was at least 3 meters long. The tip of the ball touched the ground, raising dirt and dust. Nicholas took a determined step towards the snake, which in turn hissed fiercely. The guy preparing to attack swung. In an instant, Nick cuts the snake in half, sending blue blood flying everywhere. A couple of cables hit the student's cheek as he landed on the ground. The spotted snake froze and collapsed to the ground, holding on for a moment before dying. Approaching the corpse of the monster, Nick immediately took its eye. It was one of the items needed for the test proving that he killed the spotted snake. The guy quickly stuffed the trophy into his bag. Nick sighed heavily and muttered, "There's a long way to go." Pushing off from the ground, he soared upward, continuing on his way. The sky lit up with pink colors, indicating that it would soon become completely dark. As he headed deeper into the wilderness, Nicholas began to hear faint cries for help. The guy landed on one of the destroyed buildings. Not far from him were about a dozen toothy wolves besieging Greg, several corpses still lying on the ground. "It's him!" Seeing his friend, the dark-haired man's eyes widened. Greg was in a very bad condition. His body was filled with blood, his face was very pale, he was holding an axe in his hands and constantly swinging it. The wolf only growled and rushed at the student. "This is bad," Nick whispered as he saw a pair of wolves rushing after Greg, taking an arrow out of the quiver. The boy took his bow and aimed at the toothy wolf. The arrow whistled straight towards the target. It hit the toothy wolf's body and he fell to the ground. Greg, not understanding what was happening, just stood there and trembled with fear. With a loud sound, Nicholas fell to the ground, covering his frightened friend with his body. "Help in exchange for points, okay?" The guy glanced over his shoulder at Greg. Nick?" the dark-haired man asked, stuttering, not believing his eyes. "Nick, run! You can't handle a fanged wolf," Greg suddenly shouted. Nicholas quickly rushed forward, only smiling at his friend's words. He went around these toothy wolves 1.5 times faster while they were trying to somehow injure the guy. He maneuvered between them every now and then, leaving the monsters behind. The dark-haired man took his sword out of its case. The look became more serious than ever. Thanks to his talent for fencing, he was able to accurately time the attack and deliver a fatal blow. Every time he swung, he would definitely take the lives of the monsters. Seeing the blood splashes, his gaze changed from more serious to more insane. The sight made Greg's pupils dilate and his throat tighten. After a while, the bodies of a dozen toothy rolls were already lying on the ground, and Nicholas's uniform was covered in blood. Touching the tip of the sword to the wolf's mouth, the guy cut off one of the fangs with a light movement. Nick took it in his palm, dabbing the blood with his fingers and put the sword away. As we agreed, I'll take the points for the wolves for myself, the guy said, putting the fang in his backpack, looking at his friend. But he only nodded. Throwing his bag over his shoulder, he turned to Greg and asked, "Planning on continuing?" The student plopped down on the ground and exhaled. "Nah, I'm done. The exam turned out to be much more dangerous than I initially imagined. I'm lucky I survived it all," Greg added, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "My teammates are seriously injured. We need to get them out of here as soon as possible." He nodded towards the students lying nearby, bleeding. "It seems that this is the only thing you can do now." Having said this, Nicholas was about to leave. At this point, Greg's expression changed and he shouted, "Nick, wait! Pseudo-monsters are being introduced into the depths of the zone. Be careful," the guy added, thereby attracting Nicholas's attention. "Pseudo-monsters?" the guy asked again and turned to his friend again. There was a gradation of creatures on the territory. First there was a beast, then a pseudo-monster, and the most important was a monster. Greg gritted his teeth and said, "I heard that the students of the First Academy decided to attack a snake that was more than 10 meters long, and it was one of the pseudo-monsters." He didn't know whether it was good or bad to tell this news to Nick. "You'll get 500 points for killing him," he added with a sigh, looking at his friend. 500? Nicholas asked again, excitement playing in his eyes. He was clearly shocked by this news. Grabbing Greg by the fabric of his uniform across his chest, Nick growled, "Where is he now?" With a trembling hand, the guy pointed somewhere ahead and quietly added, "In the southeast." Nick followed his friend's finger with his gaze, peering into the distance. Nick pushed off the ground and rushed forward, leaving Greg in the dust. 500 points don't just fall on the ground. If I get them, first place will be mine. Nick's eyebrows drew together, and his gaze became more gloomy. "Nick, take care of yourself." Greg looked at his friends disappearing back and took a deep breath. Nick, like lightning, rushed through the ruins that looked like houses. After running some more distance, he stopped. His eyes widened and his breathing became ragged. The corpses of his students lay around him. This is the uniform of the students of the First Academy. The thought flashed through Nick's head. When he noticed the red tint of the vest on one of the corpses, the sound of an explosion could be heard in the distance, and just by the sound one could understand how intense the battle was. "He's there." The guy's hair rustled from a strong gust of wind. Pushing off the ground, he covered a great distance in one jump. About 30 seconds later, Nicholas arrived at the scene, hiding on one of the rooftops. There was a look of complete bewilderment in his eyes as he looked at the battlefield. There were 10 students on the field, besieging a wounded purple snake, which was not 10 meters long, as Greg said, but reached 12 meters. "Forward," came Darren's voice amidst the blazing fire. "We must finish this creature," he added, and together with his guard he rushed into battle. His sword struck the snake's scales with a loud thud. "Mr. Snake's stamina is running out. Now is the time to kill him." The blonde man peered and also dealt several blows to the monster's body. The spotted snake roared loudly. He was hit by a lot of arrows. He had a lot of living and sword wounds. The soles of Darren's boots entered the monster's liquid, slimy blood. "Great! I'll take care of the rest." The long-haired man quickly pushed off the ground. His figure towered directly over the monster. He swung his sword in mid-flight. The instant blow went straight to the frontal part, leaving behind a splatter of blood. The spotted snake growled loudly in pain. A smile lit up Darren's face as he began to rejoice when the monster's huge tail threw him far away. He landed with a loud thud on one of the destroyed buildings. "The 500 points will still be mine," Darren said, groaning in pain. The monster fell to the ground with a loud thud. "Is he dead?" Nick asked himself, watching all this from afar. The guy punched the concrete next to him. "Damn, if I had come a little earlier," Nicholas muttered to himself through clenched teeth, looking at the snake's body. Darren pushed the rock away from himself with all his might, climbing out from under the rubble. "Congratulations, sir," said the guard. The long-haired man walked past the students and they bowed before him. A smile appeared on his face and he laughed quietly. "First place is now rightfully mine," he shouted, clenching his fist. Suddenly there was a loud roar. The fierce spotted snake activated its blood power just like the silver wolf and rose from the ground. With a flick of his tail, he sent several students flying in one fell swoop. Darren and his blonde guard immediately tensed up as they saw several students flying away from the monster. "Got into a bloody outburst state?" Darren's face twisted, and his gaze became even more ominous than before. The next moment, the spotted beast disappeared into the distance, and the dark-haired one shouted, This is not a pseudo-monster, but a full-fledged monster. Then should we pursue him? One of the students shouted, and Darren turned around sharply, barking, "Of course! He's worth 1,000 points." 1,000? The students asked again, shock evident on their faces. "Forward! We can't let anyone else get ahead of us," Darren shouted again, and the students from his academy rushed forward. He himself also followed them, wanting to catch the monster as soon as possible. "Wow! I never thought a monster worth 1,000 points would appear here," Nick said excitedly, and several small flashes formed around him. "Sorry guys, but I'm faster," he smiled, looking back at the students of the First Academy. The guy's palm landed on the cold concrete, purple sparks still emanating from it. Talent for speed. "To the max," sparkled around, and Nick dropped to the ground, standing in a pose, preparing to rush forward. His gaze became as crazy as it had been then, and his eyebrows frowned, forming wrinkles on the bridge of his nose. He rushed forward so quickly that after him, stones flew in all directions. Like a rocket, Nicholas used his speed to fly past the destroyed buildings. The spotted snake left a trail of blood behind it as it moved resolutely in a direction familiar to it. Nick sank down onto the asphalt, pushing his hands and the soles of his boots into the concrete, or rather, what was left of it. "The students of the First Academy have not arrived yet." "Excellent," he said quietly, and noticed with his gaze a huge trail of blood. Squatting on one knee, he touched the purple liquid with his fingertip. An unpleasant and cold substance touched the guy's skin, causing goosebumps. Without paying any attention to it, he put his finger to his nose and sniffed the air as if he were a sniffer dog. Rising from his knees, he looked around the huge building, on which hung a worn poster, "Discounts up to 30%. Most likely it was once a shopping center. "It looks like I'll get 1,000 points, thought Nicholas, and smiled at the corner of his lips at his own thoughts, while his gaze carefully examined the building. There was purple mucus everywhere, and it gave off an unpleasant, even stinking smell. Nick took a step forward, and his boot stepped into the liquid that the ferocious snake had left behind. That creature is somewhere nearby. The dark-haired man confidently walked forward, but he also looked around, carefully examining the mountains of garbage around him, in the hope that the beast was hiding behind them. Finding nothing outside, he went into the room. The room was deep and stretched to the very, noticing the monster. Nick froze in place. The spotted snake stretched out like a string, throwing its head back and opening its huge mouth. Some kind of white liquid was dripping from the ceiling, or more precisely from the sharp end of the stone. The beast swallowed it greedily, catching the droplets with its tongue, which glittered in the light. What is he drinking? Nicholas frowned, still standing rooted to the spot, as if studying the beast's actions. Clearly not ordinary water. The guy looked askance at the monster, or rather at what he was drinking. The liquid was transparent but with flashes of something white. With a ringing sound, Nick pulled out a sword from his bosom, which flashed in the light. "Okay, I'll think about it after I get 1,000 points," he said loudly, and pulled his elbow back, taking a defensive stance. Nick ran so fast that it seemed like his feet barely touched the ground. Distracted from his occupation, the monster turned to the young man, showing with his whole appearance that he was ready to defend himself. Nick flew up above the beast, confidently heading towards his face. Well, even though the snake was wounded, it quickly dodged the guy's attack. Her huge fist fell to the ground, shaking everything around. Stones flew up, and Nicholas with them. Unable to control his body, he flipped over in the air several times. He pulled out a bow from behind his back, and then also took the arrows into his nimble fingers. Pulling the bowstring, the guy takes aim, gathering all his abilities together. 3 arrows flew straight towards the target, cutting through the air. There was a loud roar as they hit the bullseye, or rather the monster's eye sockets. Nicholas landed not far from the beast, one leg forward and the other bent at the knee, his bow and arrows flying a little further. Without saying a word, Nick grabbed the handle of the ball and squeezed it tightly in his palm. Using his speed talent, he flew towards the monster again, not giving it a chance to recover. This only angered the beast. It swung its clawed paw, but Nicholas quickly dodged. The sharp end of the sword quickly pierced the ferocious snake's hand, and it let out a loud cry of pain. It wasn't enough. Nick continued to push the sword deeper into the monster. My hands were already at their limit. They were shaking, hurting, and the veins on my skin were bulging. Nicholas screamed loudly, channeling all his strength into his sword to finish off the monster. Their voices were mixed up. Chaos reigned all around. Blood was pouring like a fountain onto the concrete. The sharp end of the sword passed through the spotted snake, emerging from it at the other end. Nicholas removed the murder weapon from the body and quickly lowered himself down. The snake's lifeless body fell onto the concrete with a loud slam, leaving a pool of blood underneath. Phew! Nick exhaled, smiling triumphantly. The monsters are insanely strong. If Darren's group hadn't weakened him, I would never have managed. The guy picked up his backpack and squinted at the sharp stone from which white liquid was dripping. If this is what he came here for, then this is definitely a very valuable thing. Nicholas took out of his briefcase a small, round glass bottle with a wooden stopper. Uncorking it, he gently lowered the bottle right in front of the stone, so that the liquid now dripped straight inside. The sharp end of the sword he thrust into the lifeless body of the monster again. Puffing and grunting, Nicholas twirled the sword a couple of times, as if drawing some kind of pattern. The eyeballs will serve as proof of murder, he placed in his palm. The monster's large eye, which in turn was bleeding stinking purple blood. And the blood from the monster's heart is incredibly valuable. Nicholas slashed his sword across the beast's flesh again. Green liquid began to flow from his heart, and the boy quickly held out the bottle to fill it to the brim. "That's enough," Nick said, shaking the bottle slightly so that the colored blood slapped against the inner walls in a wave. The dark-haired man turned around and looked again at the sharp stone hanging down, with white liquid pouring down it. With a slight movement of his hand, he swung, cutting through the air. The sharp end of the sword quickly passed over the stone, splitting it in half. With a loud thud, one half fell to the concrete floor. Nicholas squatted down next to his bag, muttering under his breath. "The points I've earned are more than enough for first place." A happy smile played across his face as he remembered that Darren was supposed to be here soon. They took the eyeballs. They sucked the blood out of the heart. The students of the First Academy screamed, looking at the corpse of the monster. "There's only a corpse left. Sir, what should we do?" the guard shouted, looking back at his long-haired man. Who was that?" His knuckles turned white and his palms shook, clenching into fists. "Who dared to steal my 1,000 points? I will destroy him," Darren shouted, making veins appear on his forehead. The sky was still shimmering in pink tones, but the weather worsened. It started to rain, or rather, to pour. Nicholas sat on one of the roofs, safely hidden in the shadows, and quietly watched the team of the First Academy. He fluttered slightly, like a sparrow in the rain, noticing the students leaving the building. The rain kept falling, but they didn't care. They were too upset, too angry. "Sir, that bastard who stole your victory points must be hiding somewhere and waiting. What should we do?" A tall man walked behind Darren, still asking questions. "Search everyone we meet along the way. I have to find this little rat." The rain fell on Darren, and his black hair turned into hanging icicles. "We can't let him get away," he shouted, frowning and lines forming across the bridge of his nose. "Yes, sir," the students of the First Academy quickly responded. Nicola adjusted the strap of his backpack and chuckled thoughtfully. "It looks like I really should hide." Channeling his power, he rushed forward again, looking for a hiding place. He hovered over the collapsed buildings, trying to find shelter because this could not continue for long. "The exam will be over in 3 days. When the points are counted, everyone will immediately understand that I killed the monster." Various dark thoughts crept into his head. He landed smoothly on the ground, looking around at what looked like a business center before. "I think this place will work as a shelter." Entering the building, or rather what was left of it, Nick threw off his briefcase, placing it on the floor. The guy sat on the concrete in the lotus position and took a bottle of green liquid in his hands. Without thinking twice, he threw his head back, raised the neck of the bottle to his lips, and began to drink. Nicholas winced and whispered quietly, sniffing the air. "Oh, if only I could have some peanuts to snack on so it wouldn't be so disgusting. I don't care. For my sister's safety, I need to get stronger. To the bottom." The boy squeezed the bottle tighter in his palm. Holding his breath, he brought the neck of the bottle to his mouth again and began to take more intense sips in order to empty the bottle faster. Meanwhile, Nicole sneezed loudly, closing her eyes. She wiped her nose with her finger, sniffed, and quietly said, "Does anyone remember me?" Nicole put her hand under her cheek and looked sadly out the window onto the grounds of the school where she studied. Nicholas placed his palms opposite each other and began to direct streams of energy towards each other, thereby forming a whirlpool. Opening his eyes, he looked around and his happiness knew no bounds. "Holy shit! The cultivation speed has increased by 4 times, he shouted, watching the bluish energy flows around him. No wonder Ben and the others are improving so fast. It's not just talent, it's using the tools, the boy thought as he looked at his bag. It contained a couple of bottles of blood from the monster's heart, small and large eyeballs. No one would have such trophies. 3 days later, everyone gathered at the site. The judges sat at their tables, and each participant approached them and showed their findings. John, 10 points. Carl, 23 points. Leo, 0 points. The teacher was counting the points, writing them down on her sheet. She looked up at Leo, who was standing with a wounded face and obviously guessed the reason. A greenish backpack fell onto the teacher's desk with a loud sound. "Master, help me count this." Wright pointed at the bag with 2 fingers, grinning smugly. The backpack was almost filled to the brim with all sorts of materials, from glowing eyes to sharp fangs. "Right, 195 points," the girl said loudly, examining the bag. When Wright's glasses were announced, the students of the second academy were proud of themselves, because Wright came from their academy. A measly 195 points, what's so cool about that? Darren's voice was heard, smiling mockingly as he walked towards the table with a large bag on his back. "Right, you're not alive, you're so strong," he added and laughed loudly, looking at his opponent. "You plan to compete with me with such a pitiful amount of points?" Darren's lips twitched into a mocking smile. "Darren!" Wright hissed through his teeth like a snake, drawing his eyebrows together. "Count this." The long-haired man unceremoniously poured all his trophies onto the table, shaking out the bag so that nothing was left in it. The teacher's eyes widened and she began to count the materials, then timidly, stuttering, "Darren, 427 points." The students of the academy began to whisper among themselves, looking frozenly at the table. "Wow, as many as 427. I didn't expect anything less from Darren. Yasmain, swing, such a big gap. I only have 30 points. Wright pointed at Darren with a sharp wave of his hand and loudly shouted, "You shameless bastard! You just took the glasses from others." The long-haired man laughed at this insult and replied, "I took them thanks to my talents." "Bastard!" the guy growled, Wright's anger pouring out as soon as Darren loomed on the horizon. "Congratulations, sir. With so many points, you'll definitely get first place," one of the girls from the first academy chimed in, coming closer to Darren. The guy rolled his eyes and sarcastically said, "No, first place will have over 1,000. The girl put her finger to her lips, looking away thoughtfully. "The students who are still alive should have all come out by now," asked the teacher from the 5th academy, and looked at the girl who was counting the points with her hands in her pockets. "Yeah, if someone didn't come out, then they're probably already dead," she replied, tucking a lock of purple hair behind her ear. "So Darren took first place," the man grinned, since he was the one who ran every year. Just as the allotted time was drawing to an end, Nicholas emerged from the wilderness, carrying a large backpack on his back. "What?" The teacher from the 5th academy turned around after hearing the sound of feet heading towards the table where he was standing. 36. Nick's step was graceful but firm. The intense gaze was directed only at the teacher who was counting the points. The boy's main trophies landed on the table: several fangs, 2 small eyes of the beast, and 2 large eyes of the monster. "This is a monster's eyeball," the teacher said loudly, examining the boy's findings. "Right, so how many points do I have?" Nick asked, looking up at her with an indifferent voice. "Nicholas, 1,036 points. Congratulations! You won first place in the exam this year." The blonde girl handed the reward to the guy and added, "Your reward is 3 bottles of mid-level monster blood and 100,000 yen. "Nick, you're a great guy," Greg yelled at the top of his lungs, genuinely happy for his friend. The leader of the second academy, Wright, only thoughtfully scratched his chin, asking the question, how did he manage to do this? Here he is. "Just think, it was a puppy from the 5th academy," Darren said through his teeth, glaring at Nicholas. "Dig up everything you can from that bastard," the long-haired man ordered, not taking his eyes off the boy, and his guard quickly replied, "Yes, sir." At that time, gossip and whispering among the team of the 5th academy did not subside. Especially Greg heated them up, bragging that Nick was his close friend. "What an idiot," muttered the teacher of the 5th academy, putting his hands in his pockets. And Greg only snorted at these words. "Teacher, you are not very happy." Nick brought glory to the 5th academy after all. The man chuckled under his breath, and the corners of his lips twitched in a weak smirk. He insulted and angered Darren's family, and they are very powerful and influential. "I'm afraid your friend may soon die suddenly." The joy instantly disappeared from Greg's face, and he just dropped his nose to the floor. On the leaderboard, the names of the top 3 were displayed, and on the left were written out the rewards, which were, for third place, 3 bottles of blood of a monster of nobody's level plus 50,000 won. For second place, 1 bottle of blood of a monster of the middle level plus 100,000 won. And for first place, 1 bottle of blood of a monster of the highest level, plus 200,000 yen. 3 bottles of blood of a monster of the middle level, plus 100,000 yen. The camera shone in the sun like new, as if it had just been bought. "Look here and smile," said the girl, and smiles appeared on the faces of the 3 winners. "The exam is officially over. Congratulations to the top 3 on their well-deserved awards," said a mechanical voice over the loudspeaker, and a camera clicked. "Puppy, you are very brave to steal something that belongs to someone else." Darren turned to Nicholas, looking him up and down. "Likewise," the guy answered calmly and smiled fleetingly. "Hey Darren, have you forgotten your own words?" Wright intervened in the conversation, looking at his opponent. "I'm not talking to you, although, what did I say there?" the long-haired man asked, wincing. "Like you, Nicholas took these glasses thanks to his talents," Wright replied, and put his hands on his hips. And in response, he heard only Darren's nasty laugh. "Who do you think is stronger than us, huh?" he added, smiling slyly. "Maybe we can find out in battle?" Darren took a step forward, getting closer to Nick. "If you have time for it, I'd be happy to," Nicholas said rudely, turning up his nose. The grin played across Darren's face again. It was there so often it was almost like it was ingrained in him. The dark-haired man looked at him from under his brows, frowning even more deeply in his already frowning gaze. 3 days later, Nicholas returned to his hometown to see his sister. His hand dropped smoothly onto the door handle, and there was a click. "Nicole, I'm home." Nick walked into the living room, closing the door behind him and taking off his sneakers. A soft patter of feet could be heard throughout the house, but the sound increased as the girl approached. "Brother," Nicole exclaimed, hugging the boy tightly, pressing her cheek to his chest. "Where have you been for so long?" She raised her large, surprised eyes to her brother. "Are you hurt?" "Let me see." Nicole started running around her brother, looking at every detail on him. Nick quickly shook his head. "No, of course, I'm perfectly fine." "By the way, I brought you some presents," he added, and grabbed the strap of his backpack, and his sister, in turn, smiled brightly, looking at her brother. 3 cups with the scarlet blood of a mid-level monster, a book with a beautiful cover, a bottle with a green liquid, a wad of money, and a broken piece of stalactite fell to the floor. Nicole took the bills in her palm and looked at her brother, whispering, "This will give you enough for your wedding." "What wedding?" "They are for you. Pay for your tuition and take some for pocket money." Nick sat down on the floor in front of his sister, tucking his legs under him. What is this?" The girl quickly took the bottle with green liquid in her hands. "To be honest, I have no idea. That's why I bought the illustrated guide to jewelry." Nick pointed to the book and then picked it up. "A jewelry reference book? Let me see it." Nicole's mouth dropped open in surprise, and she poked her curious nose into the book her brother had just opened. Nick's eyes widened when he saw the name of what he brought home. The text in the book read, "Treasure name, Earthcore elixir. Effect, liquid essence formed by terranite stones that have absorbed the chi energy of the heavens and earth for hundreds of years. When consumed, it can enhance one's cultivation talent. However, the elixir is only effective for below intermediate talents." Nick frowned, remembering the ferocious spotted snake greedily gulping down the liquid in the abandoned building, and a thought flashed through his mind. That snake must have evolved into a monster by consuming that elixir. I never thought that the thing I got so easily would be a valuable item. "Hold on!" Nicole's voice brought his brother out of his lofty thoughts. He looked up and saw a bottle in front of him. "This stuff can improve talents. It will be good for you to drink it," the sister said, examining the green liquid at the bottom of the glass bottle, still holding it out to Nick. "No, I don't need her anymore." Nicholas shook his head, his black hair falling carelessly over his face. "We'd better make you stronger, Nicole." His voice sounded a little rough, and his gaze became more penetrating. "What? Me?" the dark-haired girl exclaimed, beads of sweat appearing on her forehead. She was clearly nervous. The sun slowly sinks below the horizon, bathing the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. "Do you want me to drink this?" came the sister's voice again, so loudly that most likely the passers-by on the street heard it. They sat opposite each other. In front of him lay the trophies that Nick had obtained on the screen. The girl still could not believe that her brother was saying this seriously, because her talent had not yet awakened. "We'll just be wasting the elixir," Nicole said as she looked at the bottle in her hands, and a window of her status appeared in front of Nicholas, showing that her cultivation talent was at the basic level, and her freezing talent had not yet been awakened. Nick thoughtfully put his finger to his chin and directed his gaze to the floor. quietly humming under his breath. "Listen, we can sell it. It's probably worth a lot of money," the girl drawled, raising her brown eyes to her brother. "That won't do. The book says about the original Terranite stones that can appear where this essence was formed. But I destroyed them." Nicholas shook his head and stood up from the floor, still holding the book in his hands. He took a couple of steps towards the sofa, adding, "Sooner or later, people will come who want to buy these stones, and they are unlikely to believe my story after all. This will expose us to danger and bring us much trouble," he continued, and with a light movement of his hand, he threw the book onto the sofa, so that with a light thud, it fell onto the soft surface. Why did you destroy them? What a pity," Nicole asked. And Nick just rolled his eyes. The girl's talent was clearly in pretending to be stupid at the right time. The dark-haired man grabbed the bottle by the neck and almost tore it out of his sister's hands, uncorking the neck. "It would be even more of a shame if you didn't drink it." Nicholas shook the glass from side to side so that the liquid began to splatter against the glass walls, and Nicole only opened her mouth to object to her brother. The guy grabbed her cheeks roughly so that her mouth opened even wider, and at that moment tension hung in the air. Nick said in a serious tone, "Open your mouth. Help! They're killing me!" she screamed. The girl began shaking her head in different directions and also waving her arms in order to somehow get rid of her brother's dead grip. Soon the bottle was empty and lay on the floor, sparkling in the sun, as if it had collected all the sun's rays. "Well, how does it taste?" Nicholas smiled triumphantly and stroked his sister's back soothingly, while she tried to understand the taste on the tip of her tongue. "Huh? Warm. And so refreshing." She answered and looked at her brother with the same big, happy, dark brown eyes, while tiny sparks flickered around. Nicole's answer didn't please Nicholas, and his eyebrows furrowed in lightning speed. The pupils of his eyes were directed at his sister, and his brain couldn't understand what was happening. Her status window remained unchanged. No increase in strength occurred, the same basic talent for improvement and an unawakened talent for freezing. "Something makes me feel sleepy. I'll cook you something to eat later," the dark-haired girl said quietly and yawned, rubbing her eye with her fist. "Rest," the guy replied, and in his head the thought was spinning. "It's strange. Why did this happen? Maybe I just need to wait." A whole hour passed. The wall clock hanging in the living room showed 6. While Nicole slept on the couch, Nicholas sat quietly and calmly on the floor, his legs crossed in the lotus position and his hands resting on his knees. Everything around him flared with a turquoise glow, and a gust of wind stirred his hair. Nick turned around sharply. A status window formed above his sister, and a frantic energy reigned around him. Such a strong flow the dark-haired man had never felt. This window stated that Nicole's human, her talent for cultivation had changed to average, and her talent for freezing was at a low level. Nicholas's pupils dilated, and beads of sweat appeared on his temples. A talent for mid-level cultivation coupled with a rare talent for freezing. A thought came to the guy's head, and he stood up from the floor, reaching his hand towards the cup of blood that he had received in the competition. Taking the trophy in his palm, he turned to look at his sister, who was still sleeping peacefully on the sofa, a smile playing on his face from his own thought. Nicole will undoubtedly become a first-class warrior. The cup glittered in the moonlight, and the red liquid inside shimmered. Nick's eyes were now directed only at him. In the shadows, they were especially expressive. But he was thinking about Darren, whom he so wanted to defeat. A couple of minutes later, the moon was already covered with gray clouds. Nicholas opened his mouth and the scarlet liquid poured inside him, carelessly breaking up the drops. "Damn, this tastes even worse." The dark-haired man muttered under his breath and pulled his hand up to the bedside table. His palm quickly grabbed a couple of nuts from the plate, squeezing them in his fist for a moment. Nick threw a handful of food into his mouth and began to chew greedily, getting pleasure just from the fact that he was eating normal food. After chewing everything, his back became straight as a string again, and his arms spread out in different directions, causing a whirlwind of purple energy. The boy clenched his teeth, the veins in his neck stood out, and his eyebrows were drawn down to the bridge of his nose, so that folds formed on his forehead. What an effect! It's scary. If I had the blood of a high-level monster, I would have broken through to the warrior stage, Nicholas thought, his eyes widening at the thought. The cup, completely empty, quietly fell to the floor, where the other cups filled with the monster's blood stood, glistening in the light. 10 days later, in the grove near the 5th Academy, the sun was shining brightly, illuminating the tops of the trees. In Nick's jet-black hair sat a small yellow chick, making a pleasant chirping sound. Nicholas sat on a large rock surrounded by trees in the lotus position, His eyes closed and his body relaxed. Suddenly, quick steps were heard in the distance. Someone was clearly heading in his direction. What to do? What to do? Nicholas! Greg's cry rang out through the bushes like a bolt from the blue. What happened? The dark-haired man asked, hearing his friend's voice and seeing his silhouette in the distance. Darren. Darren. The guy tries to catch his breath quickly, bends over and rests his hands on his knees, and then points his thumb behind his back. Nick stood up abruptly, looking down at Greg and exclaiming, "He came? No, he locked himself in his room and is clearly plotting something. He probably wants to break through to the warrior stage and only then settle the score with you." The guy exhales, trying to catch his breath, and points his finger at Nicholas. The dark-haired man rolls his eyes slightly and sits down on the rock in the lotus position again, muttering, "I thought Darren came with a challenge, but he just locked himself in the room." But such a gesture from his friend made Greg scream at the top of his lungs. "Why the hell are you sitting down again? This is serious." Nicholas exhaled through his nose and closed his eyes, trying not to listen to the student's screams. "If he becomes a warrior, he'll crush you like a bug," Greg shouted with renewed vigor, turning his gaze to Nick, who calmly replied, "I'm also improving. I have nothing to fear." The guy straightens up, wiping his mouth off his forehead, and squints slightly, starting to rant to his friend. His family is very noble. He has a ton of resources. And what do you have? 3 bottles of mid-level monster blood? And let me guess, you've already drunk them. From his friend's tone, a smile played across Nicholas's face and he answered, laughing slightly, "Well, yes, that's it. It looks like you're doomed. Your friend. I'll help you arrange the funeral. I'll take care of your sister," said Greg, bending down to the ground and resting his palms on it. Nicholas seemed not to hear him. His expression was serious, and thoughts were spinning in his head. Right now, I only have the low-grade blood that I extracted from that snake and its heart. After using all of this, I should break through to the advanced disciple stage. His eyebrows drew together and his eyes closed. His lips pressed tightly together, forming a thin line. Although I'm only 1 step away from the warrior level, I can't become one yet. But with the talents that I've already copied, I can go out and fight even with a warrior. His dark brown eyes suddenly opened wide and looked into the distance. Darren's family home was huge and beautiful, but even with these qualities it was gloomy. The gray sky and the crows flying everywhere only added to the atmosphere. Next to the large iron gates stood a guard of strong build, although in comparison to them, he looked like a bug. Suddenly the iron began to break. Cracks appeared on all the gates, as well as the characteristic sound that everything was about to fall. And so it happened. The gate fell to the ground with a crash, raising dust and dirt everywhere, and the silhouette of a man appeared on the horizon. "Congratulations, sir. You have become a warrior." The blonde guard bowed, placing one knee on the ground, and dust hit his face. "Long live the master," cried another servant, and among the bright pink glow, Darren's strong muscles appeared. The sun rose high into the sky, illuminating Darren's family's large house, along with its vast garden. "Congratulations, young master, on your breakthrough to the warrior level." "Long life to you," said the fair-haired man, and bowed his head, placing his palm on his knee. Girls in formal business clothes approached Darren. One of them threw a robe over the guy's broad shoulders. "Ha ha ha! Darren, you're finally out!" A male voice echoed through the living room. "Father!" the boy exclaimed, noticing the man at the entrance. "And I see you've become a warrior. I didn't expect anything less from my son." Darren's father spread his arms out to the sides and smiled, taking a couple of steps forward. Charles, besides being Darren's father, was also one of the elders of the 10 Elders clan, an elite warrior of the middle rank. The man slightly narrowed his eyes as he looked at his son. "Well done, Darren." His large hand landed on the boy's shoulder, patting it a few times. "Don't worry, father. I won't disgrace our family," the long-haired man replied, smiling at the corner of his lips, looking with his piercing gaze at the elder. "I have no doubt, by the way, great-grandfather wants to reward you personally." Charles's face became more serious. He directed his eyes at his son. "I thank you both for your support." Darren suddenly sat down on one knee, bowing his head to the man, who laughed lightly and said, "Ha ha ha, stand up." Charles turned his head towards his guard and said sternly, "Go to the kitchen and check if everything is ready." The haired man in sunglasses nodded in response. His palm suddenly rose up and he said loudly, "Wait, I'll go myself." "Darren, don't forget to eat later. I made sure to prepare your favorite dishes for the celebration." Charles folded his hands behind his back, turning to his son, who replied, "Thank you, father." With heavy steps, the man headed towards the exit, and his guard followed him. "Did you find out what I asked you to?" Darren's face suddenly became serious, his eyebrows drawing together, making her look even more frowning than before. "Yes, sir. I found out everything a long time ago. That guy, no parents, no past, no support. We can do anything with him," the servant said, a sly smile playing on his face. "Oh, so this scum doesn't have anyone? I thought he had someone very powerful behind him." The long-haired man walked towards the door leading to the street, and the fair-haired guard followed him. "In that case, send someone to kill him." Darren went out into the courtyard, in the middle of which stood a large fountain. He put his fingers to his chin as if thinking and looked at his servant. "Kill? Sir, killing in the zone is one thing. But if we kill a person outside of it, then it doesn't matter how strong and influential your family is." "We could have problems," the blond man said, confused and stuttering. Darren sat calmly in his large red chair, decorated with precious stones, and raised his glass for wine to be poured into it. "And who told you that you need to act on behalf of my family? Hire the Dark Shadow Killers. No one will investigate a case they are involved in," the guy added, and smiled his evil smile, raising the glass to his mouth. "But sir, their services are worth at least $1 million," the servant protested again, spreading his arms out to the sides. "Is it worth spending so much for some kid?" "Oh, servants are servants. You all think like poor people, don't you understand?" Darren looked at the man from under his brows. "If a genius is discovered among the poor." Component placement. A glass half filled with wine falls on the table with a loud bang. It needs to be eliminated immediately. The crystal suddenly breaks in Darren's palm from the pressure of his fingers, and he throws the shards forward. But the Fifth Academy can't raise a genius. The guard's eyes widened, his gaze becoming more frightened. "The weak die, and the strong survive." "That's the law of the world," Darren laughed, revealing her snow-white teeth. In the grove not far from the Fifth Academy, a strong wind blew, and then raindrops began to fall to the ground. With a loud whistle, the sword flew through the air. Nicholas trained his speed, his body like lightning, crossing a long distance, weaving between the trees. Suddenly, he raised the sword high above his head and swung. A lot of fragments from the stone flew in different directions as soon as the tip of the sword touched the stone. Nick stopped, exhaled heavily, and his black bangs fell over his eyes. "It looks like it's going to rain." "Time to go home," the dark-haired man said, and brought his palm to his forehead, shielding his face from the wind and other things, looking up. The boy's boots made squelching sounds as they stepped on the wet asphalt. He went into the alley to shorten his path and take shelter from the rain. There was all sorts of garbage around, mixed with motors and valves that were working with a loud roar, and warm steam was emanating from them. Suddenly, Nicholas stopped, and a few splashes from the puddles on the asphalt landed on his shoes. His body tensed and his fingers twitched and curled slightly. Nick's expression changed as he looked back, something more than just shock appearing in the depths of his pupils. Above the overhead power line support, the silhouette of a status window was faintly visible. "What is this?" The guy's eyes narrowed and he began to peer more and more into the glowing shadow. It was indeed a status window that read, "Human, James, Cultivation Talent, Basic, Shadow Talent, Low." It disappeared as quickly as it appeared, dissipating into the air. Talent copied. Nicholas's instinctive talent, he could at any time scout everything around him for 3 meters. Just like now, the guy felt that someone was approaching him. For a second, he even stopped breathing. His heart gave a loud thump, and his eyes widened with tension. A black silhouette with flashes of green flew past Nicholas. He swung his blade, but the boy quickly reacted and parried the attack with his sword. Their weapons clashed, causing a loud sound of metal hitting each other to echo around. His feet slipped on the asphalt and he flew back a couple of meters. His legs were stretched out and spread apart as if he wanted to do the splits, and his left hand was lowered onto the wet asphalt. His gaze became gloomy. His bangs, wet from the rain, fell over his eyes and he asked in a languid voice, "Who are you?" The metal sparkled in the light of the lantern, and drops of rain fell on the sharpness of the sword. "Your death." A guy with long dark hair and a wide smile looked down at the guy. Thunder rumbled. The rain still hadn't calmed down and was pouring down like buckets, dripping onto the wet asphalt. "Who are you?" Nicholas asked louder, activating his powers, and a blue glow began to shine around him. The guy opposite stood in the shadows. Only the green haze around him made it possible to notice him. The villain's long tongue ran along the sharp red blade, and everything around him glowed green. Darren really hired this killer? Nick tightened his grip on the handle of his ball. But he's already a warrior. He could have come and fought me himself. What's he up to? Nicholas's eyes narrowed slightly and opened, taking in more of the cold air. Suddenly, a strong wind arose, causing pebbles to fly up from the asphalt. James jumped up, raising dust around him, and brought his sword behind his back, ready to attack. His gaze was intense and focused only on the guy. He extended his sword forward, heading towards Nick. The glitter from the ball flashed in the dark-haired man's eyes, and folds formed on his forehead from the fact that his eyebrows were furrowed. Jameson's red blade headed straight for Nick, but collided with his ball. Nicholas quickly repelled the attack and ran forward, dodging. When he turned around, there was only a green glow in place of James. He disappeared again, the guy thought. He stood up again, holding himself with both legs, and began to gather his strength together. Apparently, the shadow talent allows its owner to become invisible. Component placement. While the guy was breathing heavily, small drops of rain were running down his face. Suddenly, James appeared out of nowhere, pointing his blade at Nick's back. The dark-haired man's eyes widened as he heard someone sneaking up behind him. He slowly turned his head to the side, looking back, hoping that he had misheard it. As soon as he notices that all his fears have come true, he suddenly flies up, moving to one of the roofs. Jace's blade crashes down onto the asphalt, leaving a dent in it. This is disgusting. How can a normal student be so fast? The long-haired man thought and clenched his teeth even harder, so that beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. "Now it's my turn," Nick shouted, and with one jerk, he flew down. Their gazes met for a second, but Nicholas's gaze was determined, while James's became fearful. The dark-haired man dropped to the ground, swinging his sword in front of him, but only cut through air. James chuckled, causing a green, shimmering swirl to form around him. Nick's force only hit the residential building, similar to a garage in front. "Been invisible again?" Nicholas snorted, looking at the cracks in the building from his own sword. It was hard for an ordinary person to resist this talent. The guy gripped the sword tighter, listening to the noise around him. "But against me, he's absolutely useless." Hearing a sound behind him, he looked back. His weapon passed straight across James's throat, going down, leaving a huge gash. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and the master of shadow art screamed at the top of his lungs in pain. With a loud thud, James's body fell to the ground, collecting sand and dust around it. "Impossible. Even the elite warriors can't see me." Breathing heavily, Hairlength stood up on his feet, pressing his palm to the bloody wound. "How did you do that?" His eyes narrowed even more, so that his gaze exuded only rage. Nicholas stamped his foot on the wet asphalt, moving slightly closer to the wounded warrior. "Want to know?" He quickly walked towards James, and a status window popped up above his head. "Then first answer me. Who sent you?" The veins on Nicholas's neck stood out, and he was determined to find out the answer. I'll tell you." James's pale palm fell on the hilt of the blade that lay nearby. "When will you die?" the long-haired man shouted, quickly approaching Nicholas. The sharpest sword was aimed straight at the guy's body. Nick's eyes grew several times larger in fear. The long-haired man used all his strength, directing it at Nicholas. The dark-haired man dodged the attack, rising up. With a loud sound, shaking everything around, Nick sank to the ground, squatting. At that very moment, like lightning, he moved forward, intending to strike. He succeeds. The sword plunges into James's body so that drops of blood gush out in a large stream onto the ground. Nicholas pierced the Shadow Master straight through with his sword. "I'll ask again." Nick began to speak without removing the weapon from the enemy's body, while he stood in shock from what had happened. "Who sent you?" the guy asked loudly, pushing the sword deeper. "Ha ha ha. You are the strongest student I have ever met. Bravo! Bravo! Well, what can I say?" James answered quietly, choking on blood. "Darren!" were the last words of the Shadow Master before Nick pulled out his sword and his body fell to the ground, lifeless. The guy stares at the enemy's body in front of him, examining every detail. "Darren!" Nicholas growled through clenched teeth, frowning. Nick squatted down in front of the lifeless body and placed his palm on James's chest. His fingers lightly touched the green haze around the corpse. A strong wind arose around them, so that Nick's hair fluttered in the wind. His arms tensed, so that sweat appeared on his forehead. The status window showed that the shadow talent was successfully copied. Nicholas rose slowly to his feet, swaying slightly from the tension in his entire body. Now the green glow that enveloped the guy's body, or rather the powers of the Shadow Warrior, were with Nick. Now Nicholas's status window was like this. Human, Nicholas, cultivation talent, intermediate, speed. Talent, low, sword. Talent, intermediate, shadow talent, low. Your shadow talent is now mine, Nick said, looking at James's pale face, which was covered in raindrops. In the grove not far from the 5th Academy, it was also raining, which frightened all the birds around. A loud clap of thunder rumbled through the sky, cutting through the silence, its sound echoing through the trees as blood began to gush out of the lifeless body again. James's body lay in the dug hole, and Nicholas stood nearby, dragging a large boulder and throwing it at the long-haired man. The guy placed his palm on a large pile, the last stone. Nick squatted down by the makeshift grave and exhaled tiredly, completely soaked by the pouring rain. A gust of wind swept through the grove, causing the leaves to move and the trees to rustle, the branches to sway under its force. The air was filled with the fresh smell of resin and earth. A leaf fell from a tree and Nicholas bent over it, and the thought flashed through his head. If you were born a man, don't be like a fallen leaf. Driven by gusts of wind and drops of rain, his gaze fell on a green leaf that lay alone on the ground. I, Nicholas. The guy lifted it up so that streams of water flowed through his fingers. I must live my life with dignity. In an instant, Nick closed his palm so that the sheet turned into mush. In a world like ours? The guy leaned tiredly against a tree, placing his hands on his knees. I must become the wind and the rain, and not be a weak leaf falling from a tree. His dark brown gaze turned upward to the dark clouds. The rain drummed on the roofs of the multi-story buildings with a monotonous rhythm, the sounds of the drops creating a harmonious and calming sound background. Water poured noisily from the shower, its jets glistening in the light, while the air around was filled with moist steam that rose in clouds. Nick stood under the hot shower strings. He soaped his black hair, massaging it with his fingertips so that the foaming mass was evenly distributed along the entire length. The guy came out of the shower. He was drying his wet hair with a towel. His bare feet stepped on the floor, heading towards the things that were lying on the sofa. With his wet fingertips, he picked up the gray t-shirt. Nick pulled it over his head, covering his muscular torso, and then pulled on a pair of black pants. He would have walked his feet across the cold floor again. Phew, how nice. The dark-haired man sat down on the sofa, leaning his back against the soft pillows. These are all James's things. Nick looked at the table where there were 2 red daggers, a book with the inscription Dark Blade, an intricate black canvas, and a couple of silver and gold cards. Excellent daggers. My weapons quickly became unusable, but they didn't care. Nicholas quickly grabbed one of the daggers and raised it to the level of his face. Gold cards for 1 million, silver cards for 100,000, a total of about 3.5 million. With his free hand, he touched one of the gold cards. Hey, Darren, I'll find the best use for your money. Nicholas laughed and picked up a handful of cards, putting them in his wallet. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a book and he took it, examining it from all sides. Shadow Blade? Bronze level. The boy read and opened the book, reading further, weapon mastery levels. Gold greater than silver, greater than bronze, greater than iron. This is a great thing. Just what I need to develop my ball skills, Nick exclaimed, smiling brightly, a glint of delight in his eyes. We need to hurry up and start training. The dark-haired man quickly got up from the sofa and walked to the door of his room, placing his hand on the handle. The door slammed behind the guy with a loud bang that echoed in the corridor. So, Chapter 1. Nicholas sat on the bed, crossing his legs in a comfortable position. He placed the book on his lap, turning the snow-white pages. After some time, thunder was heard outside the window, shaking the windows, and bright lightning appeared. Nick looked up from his book abruptly, his eyes raising and staring at one point. Why isn't Nicole back yet? With the same abrupt movement, he jumped out of bed, looking back at the door. If Darren hired a killer to finish me off, that means he knows everything about me. Thoughts ran through Nick's head one after another as he rushed to his window. In other words, Nicole is in danger too. His hand quickly fell on the window frame and pulled it towards himself, thereby opening it. The guy climbed out of the window of his room, throwing his leg over the windowsill. He held onto the window frame with one hand, his feet resting on the concrete of the multi-story building. In an instant, he flew forward like a bullet, using his talent for speed. Nicole, it's going to be okay, Nick promised, but it was probably a promise to himself, his eyes looking forward as the wind ruffled his hair and the cool night air brushed against his skin. The rain poured down without stopping. Drops of water drummed on the umbrellas of passers-by, creating a monotonous rhythm. Xiaoqin's secondary school towered over the surrounding area, its imposing red brick building and pointed roofs topped with spires, giving it a Gothic appearance. Nick, like the raindrops, quickly descended. With a loud thud, he landed on the asphalt in the alley next to the school, getting on all fours and splashing water around. The guy ran out of the narrow alley, his bare feet softly touching the wet asphalt. He looked around. "Nicole, where are you?" Eyes feverishly ran over the faces of passers-by, looking for the familiar face of her sister. This is just a normal school. People with talents would never start a fight in a place like this. Component placement. Nicholas stopped in the middle of the street, clenching his fingers into fists from nerves and inner worries. Although a man like Darren hardly plays by the rules, Nick's gaze became stern, and his black bangs stuck to his forehead. The guy tried to concentrate, but the surrounding noise only distracted him. Suddenly, the tip of an umbrella poked his back and a voice rang out. "Don't move!" Nicholas, using his power, flew around the man behind him with lightning speed, ending up behind him. "Don't move!" The eyes turned steel again and focused on the gray hood ahead. "Brother, it's me!" Nicole waved her hand in a friendly manner, removing the cloth from her head and smiling. Nicole ... Nick froze in place, his eyes widening and his eyebrows rising. "What were you doing there for so long?" The dark-haired man immediately turned on his caring older brother, putting his hands on his hips. Nicole grinned and replied, "Today is my day on duty. Cleaning and all that. By the way, why are you without shoes? You didn't even bring an umbrella. You'll get soaked through," Nicole added, and took her red umbrella in her palms, opening it. "Well, forgot in a hurry." The guy shrugged and walked forward, following his sister, who was babbling. "How did you do that trick just now? Tell me, I'm interested." A black passenger car stood nearby, raindrops falling on its shiny hood, producing a rhythmic sound that resembled a drumbeat. The coated glass slowly rolled down and the silhouette of a man with long hair appeared inside the car. "Why is he still alive?" Darren's eyes narrowed and his teeth ground together. The rain continued to drum on the asphalt. Drops on the ground formed small puddles that sparkled in the light of the street lamps. "Here you go, your grilled sausage." The palm pulled out a sausage, fried on both sides, which was impaled on a black stick. "Thank you." Nicole accepted the treat, deftly grabbing the wand while Nick stood nearby holding the umbrella. Nicholas and his sister walked down the wet street, sheltering under one large umbrella that swayed slightly in the wind, holding freshly bought grilled sausages in their hands. "Oh yeah. What would you like for dinner? I'll make it tonight," Nicole responded as she walked next to her brother. Let me think. What about your signature steamed meatloaf?" Nick replied. Darren's black car moved quietly, maintaining a safe distance, and the tires touched the asphalt almost silently. Nicholas found this strange, so he turned slightly, glancing at the car. As they turned the corner with their sister, the car stopped, losing sight of its destination. It had been raining for several hours. The air around was saturated, and gray clouds painted over the city. "Bro, dinner is ready." Nicole walked into the living room, holding a bowl of something edible in her hands. "Help me set the table," the girl said louder, but Nick, who was standing on the balcony, was staring down at the black car next to their house. "Yeah, I'm coming," Nick muttered quietly, turning to his sister, but his gaze was still directed at the car. A couple of days later, after the rain, the city woke up to bright sunlight. The sky cleared, and its blue contrasted with the shine of freshly washed asphalt. "Nicole, please solve the following problem," came the teacher's voice as he walked around the classroom, holding a textbook in his hands. "Okay," the dark-haired girl stood up from her seat, holding her written piece of paper in her fingers. Nicholas stood on one of the rooftops, his figure standing out against the morning sky. He was dressed in a black hoodie that fit tightly around his head, hiding his face in shadow. The guy turned his head towards the parking lot and his fingers touched the hood. "Take it off." This has been going on for 3 days. The same black car that the guy had seen before near his house was parked above one of the parking spaces. "You dare to harm my sister? This time you have truly crossed the line," Nicholas whispered, the pupils of his dark brown eyes not moving from the black silhouette. "What? They're leaving?" Nick suddenly perked up, causing his hair to flutter. The boy's vision did not deceive him. The car was indeed leaving the school grounds, heading off in an unknown direction. At that very moment, Nicholas rushed after them, jumping off the roof and pushing off the edge. Using his powers, he flew down, gaining speed. Like a cheetah, he raced through the city's high-rises, leaving behind only a trail of pink lightning. The car was racing down the road when suddenly the driver slammed on the brakes as he pulled into a blind alley. The wheels squealed and the rubber dug into the asphalt, making a loud noise. Around the car, there were only useless construction pipes and concrete blocks. Darren's blonde security guard stepped out of the car, looking around, not noticing that Nicholas flew over him, landing on the edge of a construction crane. What is this place? Nick looked around, and indeed this alley seemed like some kind of construction site. Darren! The dark-haired man hissed, noticing his enemy's servants. Dark red blood splashed onto the asphalt, leaving an imprint. One of the guards swung and hit the man in the jaw so hard that he fell onto the cold asphalt. Young master, I really don't have the money to pay off the debt right now. The man lying on the floor croaked, swallowing his own blood. I swear, I will give them to you as soon as they appear. Please, let me go. His palm fell under his chin, and his head twitched, trying to rise. If you don't pay it back today, tomorrow you'll owe twice as much. After all, you didn't think that borrowing money from me would be so easy. Darren sat down on a handful of iron pipes lying around. Isn't that right? He clasped his hands together in front of him and spread his legs wide, leaning forward slightly. I really don't have any money. Your interest rates are too high. Please let me go. I have children and elderly parents to take care of. The man sat down, tucking his legs under him and bowing his head down. Young master, I'm back. A silhouette of a guard appeared near the exit. Nicholas used his ability to disappear from sight to get closer to Darren's gang and carefully watched what was happening. Any news from our shadow assassin? The long-haired man asked, looking up at the servant. No, he disappeared into thin air. I'll try to contact him later through a frontman, he replied. Nick's eyebrows rose in surprise when he heard that Darren had actually hired the killer. Do some people really think that the offspring of influential families like me? Darren began to slowly walk towards the man who was still sitting on the ground. Can you just screw me over like that? The long-haired man shouted. He stepped with his pointed shoe right on the debtor's face, causing blood to spurt out in all directions again. I would never serve you faithfully and truly, that's all I want. I wouldn't even dare to think about it. Sweat appeared on the blonde guard's face. Young master, he is dead. One of the servants bent over the man's bloody body, touching his neck with his fingers to check for a pulse. Get rid of the body. Darren snapped his fingers and looked at the guard, asking, Okay, have you figured out how to take care of Nicholas's little sister yet? The man bowed his head, looking down as he replied, At first, I wanted to entrust this to a friend who had recently been released from prison, but now I think it would be a mistake to trust this matter to someone else, so I'll take care of it myself, the guard added, and Darren approached him, taking a couple of steps forward. You have nothing to worry about, sir. Against the blonde man, Darren looked low and rather puny. He smirked at the corner of his lips, creating a couple of dimples on his cheek. In 1 second, the palm hit the guard's chest with all its force and he flew back a couple of meters, spitting out blood. The man bent over the ground, pressing his palms into it and croaked. You, young master, you, for what? Darren chuckled softly and replied, Punishment for doing a bad job. His gaze dropped to his bloody palm. Nicholas extended his palm and it glowed bright red, and a second later he was tightly clutching the weapon in his fingers. Armed with a blade in each hand, he jumped from his hiding place. Darren, noticing someone's silhouette behind him, turned around, frowning. One touch of Nicholas's sharp blade, and a sharp sound like tearing fabric rang out in the air. A smile appeared on the dark-haired boy's face as soon as he landed on the ground. Silence reigned around. Darren's body fell with a dull sound onto the asphalt, and the scarlet liquid spread over his body, staining his expensive suit. The guards immediately hesitated in panic, seeing how the headless body of their master fell to the ground. An ability to hide one's location, that's a shadow talent. Could it be that you? The blonde man frowned, looking around. James? Nicholas slowly emerged from the shadows, holding the red blades of the Shadow Master on either side of him. There were red drops of blood on his face, and he broke into a smile when he noticed the surprised look of the servants. What? How can it be you? Where did you get this shadow talent? The blonde screamed at the top of his lungs, noticing Nicholas. I checked everything. You're just a piece of shit with weak talent. How could you kill the young master with one blow? The man breathed heavily, pressing his palm to his chest. Where the fuck is James? Answer me, bastard. Nicholas rolled his eyes, lifting his chin up and stretching his neck. He glared at the blonde man, exhaling loudly, sending a cloud of steam out of his mouth. Suddenly, the wind picked up, raising small debris from sand to stones. Nicholas flew up, pointing his weapon at the guard, who flinched at the sudden change in scenery. The blade rose above the blond man's head, glowing bright red. "You can't kill me!" the man screamed at the top of his lungs, looking with wide eyes at the approaching gun. The blade moved down slowly and confidently, its tip sliding across the skin, leaving behind a thin trace, the blade penetrating the flesh, cutting it with a crunching sound. The body of the fair-haired security guard fell onto the dusty asphalt. Nick calmly sat down and took a gray rag out of the pocket of his sweatpants. The guy carefully wiped the dirty weapon, trying not to leave any marks. The gray color of the rag gradually became darker from the red liquid, and when he finished, he threw the piece of cloth next to the guard's dead body. His palm was directed at the blades that lay on the damp ground, and in an instant, sparking, they disappeared from sight. Nick raised his hand and pulled the hood over his head, the edges of the fabric tightening slightly, giving him a more mysterious look. "I'm not some spineless sheep that you can just bring to the slaughter whenever you want. Now you have yourselves to blame for targeting the wrong person," Nicholas said, looking down at Darren's lifeless body. He walked slowly towards the exit. He again, like a cheetah, raced among the city's high-rises, leaving behind only a trail of pink lightning. An hour later, a pair of identical cars stopped in an alley. "Who?" The man clenched his fist so tightly that a couple of veins appeared on it. Charles's gaze hardened. The corners of his lips turned down even lower, and he muttered through his teeth, "Who did this? Who killed my son?" The man said loudly and squatted down in front of the boy's body. "10th Elder, we found this." One of the guards picked up a bloody rag from the floor. "It looks like this is the work of a shadow assassin." The servant handed the man a bundle of cloth. They hired a shadow assassin to do this? How disgusting. Charles took the rag in his hands and looked down at it with a sad look in his eyes. "The Elder!" the guards suddenly shouted, and a tall man with long gray hair entered the room. Dexter, the so-called Elder of the Darren family. He is also the only great martial arts warrior in the family. He slowly walked forward, putting his hands in his pants pockets. "The oldest," Charles exclaimed in surprise, turning towards Dexter. "Elder, my son is dead. The genius of our family has been killed." The man immediately rushed down, kneeling in front of the Elder. "I see that, now get up and tell me," Dexter said in a calm tone. The Elder, Darren recently broke through to the warrior level, recently sat at a feast in his honor. One day he could become a great warrior, could elevate our family to an unattainable level. Charles began to babble, still kneeling in front of the Elder of their family. But now he met such a miserable death, it's too much. A lifeless body without a head lay not far from the men. That's right. He was the reliable new generation of the family. If a second great warrior appeared in our family, our influence in the city would sharply strengthen. Dexter growled through his teeth like a tiger. "This is why my son's death cannot go unanswered." A single tear rolled down Charles' cheek. "Elder, please, avenge Darren." The man held out a folded cloth to the long-haired man. Dexter carefully took the blood-soaked rag from Charles's hands. "Shadow Killer?" The Elder looked closely at the inscription on the cloth. His eyes widened in an instant. "It must be the families that hold a grudge against us. Most likely it is they who hold a grudge against him." Dexter voiced his guesses, squeezing a piece of cloth in his palms. The man unfolded the rag, holding it up in front of him, carefully going over each detail. In the very corner of it, he noticed an inscription. He narrowed his eyes, looking at her more closely. "Iron Fang!" Dexter suddenly exclaimed, clutching a bloody rag in his palm. Then she quickly dropped to the ground, at the Elder's feet. The next day at the 5th Academy, the sun was shining brightly, illuminating the roofs of the buildings. "Iron Fang? This organization is much more powerful than ours in Linhai," Greg answered reasoningly, spreading his palms out to the sides. The Elder of the Darren family believes that some families from Linhai have secretly colluded with the Iron Fang. Most likely they are planning to kill the young geniuses of the elite families in order to then take over the entire city, the dark-haired man continued, frowning his brows. Greg leaned towards Nick, put his hand to his lips and whispered, "I heard that they killed Darren right after he broke through to the war level. They just chopped his fucking head off." Nicholas exhaled, smiling slightly that no one suspected him of killing Darren and his guards. "By the way, you were the first on his list of people he wanted to kick ass with when he became a warrior. But someone suddenly killed him, so you must be a very lucky son of a bitch." Greg started walking forward, leaving his friend behind him. Nick bowed his head slightly, his gaze fixed on the ground, his brow furrowed, and his lips pressed into a thin line. Did I accidentally ruin Iron Fang's plans? Or is this old geezer deliberately trying to pit Iron Fang and Linhai against each other? Nicholas walked forward, not noticing that his friend had already disappeared from sight. The sun filled the academy with golden light. The rays of the sun pierced the leaves of the trees, creating a play on the soft grass. The next day, at 4 a.m., the city is plunged into silence. The streets are empty, only the rare cars drive by. Nicholas sat up in bed, yawning sleepily. He slowly stretching his arms up. With a slight effort, he stood up, his bare feet touching the cold parquet floor. Nick, still a little sleepy, walked over to the chair where his sweatshirt was hanging. He reached for it, and with one easy movement threw it over his head. He walked up to the bag lying on the table and grabbed the long handles with his nimble fingers. With slow steps, he headed towards the door of his room, which led to the corridor. Right at the entrance, he bent down to tie the laces on his sneakers. "Brother," he suddenly heard, and raising his gaze saw his half-asleep sister, who, rubbing her eyes, was approaching him with small steps. "Sorry, I woke you up after all," Nicholas said quietly and continued lacing his shoes. "Where are you going so early?" Nicole looked at the dark-haired man in surprise. "To the wilderness training. I need to get stronger as fast as possible." Nick stood up, adjusting the strap of his bag on his shoulder. "But you just came back. You're leaving alone again. Maybe you won't go. Well, or at least take your friends with you," the dark-haired girl said almost in a whisper, pressing her fingers to her chin. "Don't worry about me, Nicole. Just stay home and don't get involved in anything." The guy glanced back slightly, looking at her over his shoulder. The sound of feet stamping on the wooden floor could be heard. Suddenly, the girl hugged him from behind, wrapping her arms around his torso. "Nicole?" Nicholas said quietly, exhaling, looking down at her hands on his torso. "Just coming back sooner," Nicole whispered, pressing her forehead against the guy's back. "Of course," Nicholas replied, continuing to stand motionless in his sister's arms. A purple glow flashed across the desert sky like a bolt from the blue. When the boy's feet hit the ground, there was a loud sound and dust rose into the air. There are rumors that there are high-level monsters in this area. However, I can't let them notice me. With my current strength, I can only fight low-level monsters. Nick stood up, dusted off his pants, and looked around. This time, a victorious smile formed on his face and he closed his eyes. "I will become a warrior myself." Nicholas rubbed his palms together, looking down. Suddenly, the air was filled with a dull roar. The ground underfoot began to tremble, at first softly, and then with increasing force. In the distance, the guy saw two huge silhouettes grappling with each other. No. His eyes widened in surprise and his eyebrows rose. "It's a monster." It was a huge horned monster, red in color, similar to the Minotaur from ancient Greece. With all his might, he stomped his paw on the other monster. Suddenly, a status window appeared in the air and it said, "Monster, Armored Ox, Blood Talent, Very Low, Defense Talent, Low. Armored Bull and Low-Level Defense Talent." Nicholas placed his index finger on his lips and used his thumb to rest his chin. "Did he notice me?" The guy froze in place as soon as he saw the armored bull heading towards him. The monster was rapidly approaching, breaking the silence with its powerful steps, the ground beneath its feet shaking from the heavy blows of its paws. "Well then, let's begin." Without any hesitation, Nicholas threw the bag off his shoulder. She fell to the ground with a dull thud. In an instant, he turned and, without looking back, rushed forward, leaving only dust behind him. Their eyes were fixed on each other. The monster growled, its chest rising and falling with each breath. The boy extended his palm and summoned his red blades again. Floating like a bird in the air, Nicholas aimed his weapon straight at the monster. The armored bull's right horn hit Nick, causing him to flip over in the air several times. The guy didn't like this. He frowned, and his gaze became sterner and angrier. A slightly transparent force field formed around the bull, which Nicholas hit, but it was useless. "His defensive talent is impressive." The boy breathed heavily, trying his best to break through the protective dome, but it was all in vain. The armored bull growled loudly, raising his head up, thereby sending a wave of vibration that threw the dark-haired man back a couple of meters. The body crashed into the cobblestone with force. The strong blow made him close his eyes in pain. The stone cracked under the weight of his body, forming a deep dent. "Well, you have a very cool skill." Nicholas smiled, revealing his snow-white teeth. A huge monster stood there, puffing, so that steam came out of his nostrils. Nick rose to his feet with renewed strength and, clutching his blades tighter, headed towards the armored bull. The monster slowly raised one of its powerful paws and began to scratch the surface, raising dust around itself. The bull leaned forward, his eyes blazing with wild determination. He suddenly lunged forward, his powerful paws hitting the ground with a loud roar, the wind whistling in his ears as he raced towards the boy, leaving behind a cloud of dust and small stones. This talent of defense, logically, Nicholas said, still smiling, it will be mine. The guy's eyes became crazy. His pupils darkened from the desire to take possession of the monster's power. Nick also rushed forward at him with incredible speed. Hundreds of tiny sparks sparkled around his body, giving him more strength. In a matter of minutes, the guy rose up, towering over the monster's head. No matter what kind of monster is in front of me, the weak spot is almost always the same. Nicholas looked at the head of the armored bull, while it opened its mouth with a loud cry, revealing sharp teeth. The dark-haired man put his hands behind his back, gripping the hilts of the blades tighter. Nicholas was full of determination as he headed straight into the open mouth of the monster. Eyes! The bull's eyelids were wide open, so the guy could easily reach the red eyes. If it weren't for the monster's protective barrier, which Nick couldn't break through with his blades. The guy clenched his teeth tighter, frowning, and a couple of drops of sweat rolled down his temple. What? I can't break through the barrier? Nicholas punched the force field again and again, but it was all a waste of time. The sharpest blade only slid along the edge of the field. Large cracks appeared on the red metal of the weapon, which sparked, indicating that it would not last long. And so it happened. The tension hung in the air, and the next time there was a deafening crack, the steel, which seemed unbreakable, broke into 100 small fragments. The guy was in shock as he watched pieces of metal fly in all directions. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that the monster was about to strike. The fist of the armored bull, cutting through the air, rushed straight towards Nicholas. It hits the target straight on, landing on Nicholas's pretty face. The guy winces from the painful blow, gritting his teeth. The dark-haired man flies a decent distance away from the monster. Nick hit his back again on a large rock. The boy was breathing heavily, lying among the sandy ruins and clouds of dust. This skill is protective. Nicholas clenched the second dagger in his palm. I want it! He slowly rose to his feet, clearing his throat. A status window appeared in front of him, reminding him that the copy skill cooldown was still 16 days. This Cooper is weaker than the Silver Moon Wolf, but stronger than that snake from the exam. Nicholas looked at the remains of his broken blade in his hand. He's huge, so I just need to find his weak spot and attack him suddenly. The guy threw the broken blade away, so that the tip stuck into the ground. His gaze was still full of determination to obtain the armored bull skill. Nicholas decided to activate his shadow talent to be invisible to the monster. He took a couple of steps forward, and his body was enveloped in a green haze. With one jerk, he flew up, placing the entire blade on his shoulder. Like an arrow, he quickly flew towards the monster, disappearing from his field of vision. The guy, focused and determined, slowly ran the sharp end of the blade along the ground. Then, with a confident movement, he raised the blade up, the blade sparkling in the sun. Damn, the shadow skill is incredible! The armored one didn't even realize he was being attacked, Nick shouted, but stopped in his tracks in an instant. However, even using sword skill, I can't break through this defense. Where is its weak point? The dark-haired man ran his eyes over the protective dome, and then thought. There must be some kind of loophole. He sat in the lotus position, right behind the monster, looking at its back. So, Nicholas drawled, looking at the armored bull's butt and tail. Oh, screw it! The protective barrier in this place is disappearing. The guy thoughtfully scratched his cheek with his fingers. Is his most vulnerable spot really his ass? Heh, I'll have to find out. Nick laughed and lowered his chin to his chest, looking at the monster from under his brows. Pushing off the ground, he flew up, using his shadow talent and speed together. The blade flashed with several thousand lightning bolts, preparing to strike. The guy was rapidly picking up speed, heading towards the armored bull's anus. The metal entered the flesh with a sharp sound, breaking through the thick crust. Blue-violet blood gushed around. The bull let out a piercing cry that echoed throughout the area. Having hit his weak spot, the monster fell to the ground with a dull thud, dead. Purple blood flowed under the armored bull's body, forming a large puddle. I was right. Nicholas smiled triumphantly, landing near the corpse of the monster he had killed. I knew it. After he died, the blade cuts through his flesh without any difficulty. Gathering all his strength, the dark-haired man plunged the blade into the soft heart of the monster. Blood gushed out like a turbulent stream. Nicholas picked up the empty bottle, tilted it at an angle, allowing the scarlet liquid to flow inside. The guy continued to fill the bottle, feeling how with each drop his fear went away and his confidence in his abilities grew. With the blood of the armored bull, he filled at least 4 glass bottles. After death, it doesn't matter how strong your talent is. Nicholas stood up, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Looking over the lifeless body of the monster, he proclaimed, "The bull's hide must be quite valuable. Eyes, eggs, blood, I'll collect everything I can. But the most valuable find is most likely this pair of horns." With a deft movement of the blade, Nick cuts the horns off the armored bull's head. Having put all the trophies into his bag, he threw it over his shoulders. "Okay, now I need a quiet place to cultivate." The boy gripped the straps of his backpack and walked forward, looking for shelter with his eyes. After some time, he stopped in a dark cave, which was surrounded by stones and stalagmites. "Fresh monster blood and peanuts made by my sister." Nick laid out everything he needed in front of him. "Well, I hope this will be my entry into the world of warriors." The guy smiled brightly, and his eyes widened at the thought that he would become the greatest warrior. Nicholas picked up the bottle of hot blood and, without a second's hesitation, brought it to his lips. The liquid was warm, thick, and he began to drink greedily. Her fingers immediately grabbed a handful of roasted peanuts, and he began to eat away the blood with the crunchy nuts. Having emptied one bottle, the dark-haired man settled more comfortably in his place, crossing his legs in the lotus position and began to meditate, gathering his strength into one. The energy was so strong that the boy's forehead became covered in sweat. 20 days later, Nicholas, as if he had never left your place, was also sitting in the lotus position, with empty bottles lying around him. The guy exhaled heavily, emitting clouds of steam from his mouth. In an instant, incredible pain pierced him. He raised his head up, growling loudly like a real beast. Everything around sparkled with bright lightning, and the guy darted from his place, running around the cave. The earth shook. Dust and sand flew into the air, and the birds sitting on the tree branches became frightened and flew away in different directions. A large stream of energy formed in the sky, coming from underground, illuminating everything around. "My lady, look!" 2 girls in raincoats stood not far from the scene of the incident. "To think that someone has broken through to the level of a martial artist in this barren land." The blonde smiled, placing her fingers on her chin. The dark-haired girl didn't answer. She just looked thoughtfully into the distance, hiding her face behind the hood. On the purple fabric there was a pattern resembling a flower, and underneath it was written, "Battle Pavilion." "What a huge flow of power," Nicholas exclaimed, clenching his fist tighter. "This is the level of a martial arts warrior." The boy looked around, admiring the power that now belonged to him. Nick looked over his shoulder, taking in the empty bottles of armored bull's blood and the empty bundle of cloth that had held the nuts. "Armored bull? It's been 20 days, I can use my copy skill again." The dark-haired man picked up his bag, his fingers gripping the cloth handle. "First of all, we need to copy the defense talent." Using his speed, Nicholas rushed towards the exit of the cave. The desert around was surprisingly quiet. There were no strong winds, and the dunes were very tiny. Nicholas touched his palm to what was left of the armored bull. A status window appeared in front of him, and it said, "Copying is not possible. The target structure is incomplete. Please select a target with a complete structure." "There is such a limitation?" Nicholas stared in surprise at the window in front of him, not the palms of his hands from the bones of the monster. If I had known, I wouldn't have gutted him into pieces." The dark-haired man exhaled heavily, closing his eyes. "My lady, could he kill the monster?" The girls were still watching from the side, standing on the sandy rocks. This man just broke through to the warrior level, but the monster had been dead for a long time. The dark-haired girl answered, looking at the guy with interest. "So it's convincing. When they killed this creature, he was still a student. No, the monster clearly didn't die by his hand." The fair-haired girl in a red cloak followed her friend's example and thoughtfully stared at the guy. "But even as a student, he dared to explore this mountain? A brave act?" Nicholas walked slowly towards the oasis, or rather towards the pond, which looked more like a large puddle. With one easy movement, he pulled off his clothes, or rather his sweater, pants, and sneakers. "I've been here for almost a month. I should probably wash up before I go home." Nicholas stretched his arms slightly, loosening up the joints and muscles. "My lady! He's doing something indecent!" the blonde girl screamed, her eyes wide open. "Be quiet! Let's get out of here!" she replied, hissing at her friend. Taking a deep breath, Nicholas leaned forward, holding his arms close to his body, and pushed off the ground with a powerful push, diving into the water. Splashes flew around him and circles spread out. When the sun was high in the sky, the boy finally reached the martial arts market, Linhai. The market was filled with a lively atmosphere. Vendors were loudly calling out to customers, and the counters were filled with everything from brightly colored dishes to powerful weapons. This looks like the biggest store on the market. The guy looked the building up and down, assessing its size. On one of the poles hung a flag with a purple flower painted on it and the words, Battle Pavilion, written on it. I'll check him first. The guy lifted his chin up. Taking slow steps, pushing off the ground with his sneakers, the guy walked forward. It so happened that two girls passed by Nicholas and one of them whispered, "Isn't this the same guy?" Nick exhaled in surprise, stopping dead in his tracks. The dark-haired girl's appearance was very similar to his sister's. The same big dark brown eyes, thick dark hair. "Nicole!" Nicholas exclaimed in surprise and turned around sharply. "Little sister?" His eyes feverishly ran over the girl's face, and a bead of sweat rolled down his cheek. "What? Little sister?" The girl also stopped and turned to look at the guy. "He's this to me?" The dark-haired girl's gaze became gloomy and piercing. "No, this is some kind of nonsense. Where did it come from, Nicole?" Nicholas turned back and slapped himself on the forehead. "But still, this girl," the dark-haired man muttered under his breath, running his hand over his face. The guy's eyes instantly grew bigger as soon as he noticed the status window that towered above the girl. She still stood motionless, one hand on her hip, looking piercingly at the guy. The status window was amazing. It said, Human, Allison, Cultivation Talent, High, Sword Talent, Intermediate, Speed Talent, Beginner. "Hey, who are you calling, sister?" Suddenly, the blonde's voice was heard. "Who gave you the right to talk to us anyway?" "Go on rummaging through the garbage dumps," she shouted loudly, taking a step forward. "What? Through the garbage dumps?" Nick, not understanding her words, looked away from the girls in surprise. "I think I just washed myself. Is there still a smell?" The guy bowed his head, running his nose, inhaling the smell around him. "Catherine, stop talking nonsense," Allison said sternly, looking at the blonde. "Oh, I'm sorry." It just slipped out. The girl replied, shyly putting her hand to her lips. "Tell him this, then this, and finally?" the dark-haired girl whispered, leaning towards her friend. "Sir, I beg your pardon. Catherine was impolite to you. My mistress has already taught me a lesson." The blonde approached the guy and bowed before him. "And she?" Nicholas began, looking after the dark-haired girl. "The lady has other things to do, so she left us." The girl's soft hand grabbed the guy's wrist. "Would you like to come to the Battle Pavilion to sell some materials? My lady is its manager. To make up for what we said earlier, we will give you double the price for any trophies." Catherine pulled the boy forward, chatting lightly. "Double?" The guy's eyes widened as he stared at the girl in surprise. "Yeah, please come in." The blonde pointed to the entrance to the pavilion. The guy walked inside with one hand in the pocket of his gray pants. "Wow, what great stuff!" Inside were displayed fighting paraphernalia, from iron armor to shields and balls. "Well, as expected from the largest shop in the martial arts market," Nick muttered, looking back at the spears that were standing in a row, leaning against the wall. Thin fingers held a saucer with a mug of tea, from which a pleasant aroma emanated. "Sir, please try our tea." One of the servants put a cup on the table, smiling welcomingly, and Nick replied, "Oh yes, thank you. So, the horns of an armored bull. Its skin." All the trophies collected by Nicholas lay on the table. "So it comes to 200,000. And taking into account the doubling of the amount, you earned 400,000, said the blonde, looking at the guy's loot. Nicholas cleared his throat, choking on his tea, and quickly said, "Shake! Shake!" He scratched his forehead with his fingers. "Here are our cards. 100,000 each." Silver cards landed on the wooden table in front of Nick. "Here you go." Catherine smiled brightly and handed the money to the guy, who calmly accepted it, replying, "Thank you. When Nicole sees how much money I brought, she will definitely be happy," thought Nicholas, looking at the silver cards in his hands. "And the lady also asked me to tell you that if you want to buy anything, then you will receive a 50% discount." Catherine picked up a blue booklet with a signature flower on it. "If so, then I accept your offer." A smile played across Nick's face, and he took the book in his hands. Well, the prices are certainly exorbitant. It's no wonder that high-level cultivation is only available to the rich. Swing open the book, the guy began to study the prices of magic items and weapons. And how can ordinary people improve themselves with such prices? Thought Nicholas, continuing to thoughtfully flip through the pages. I'll take the body strengthening technique, the monster manual, 3 bottles of mid-level monster blood, and 3 bottles of Qingyuan solution. Let's start with these things. The dark-haired man looked up at Catherine, slamming the book shut. Okay, just a minute. The blonde walked quickly towards the shelf with jars of monster blood. And taking into account your discount, the amount is 785,000. As an apology, we will round it up in your favor and… Catherine put the suitcase with all the accessories in front of the guy. That'll be 700,000. The girl smiled brightly, leaning her palms on the wooden counter. Here, take it. There's $1 million. Nicholas handed the girl a gold card. Here's your change, please. The blonde held her hand back, handing over the remaining money. Nicholas picked up his suitcase with the trophies, but for a moment he thought, this is all well and good, but it is unlikely that such a prestigious store would give me such favorable conditions just because of those words about garbage dumps. The dark-haired man shook his head and headed towards the exit. I'm just an ordinary poor guy. What did they see in me? It can't be. They won't say anything. His steps towards the door became slower. He extended his hand and almost grabbed the handle of the wooden door. Suddenly, I heard Catherine's shrill voice behind me. Sir, wait! Nicholas stopped abruptly and rolled his eyes, thinking, well, I knew it. It can't be that simple. Anything else? The guy asked in a languid voice, looking over his shoulder at the girl. If the gentleman is not busy at the moment, our manager would like to meet with you in person. Catherine pointed her palm at the stairs leading up. The corners of the guy's lips crept upward. Sure, lead the way. Nick nodded, his black bangs falling over his eyes. The blonde pushed the door with her palm, causing it to creak open. Allison slowly brought the hot tea to her lips, but froze when she heard the piercing creak of her door. She turned her head towards the sound, smiling slightly sweetly, her back straight as a string, her knees pulled together. Please, sir. Catherine led Nicholas into a spacious office, where everything was still made of wood. Damn, how much she looks like her sister. His heart started beating faster. The guy couldn't look away. Allow me to introduce myself. Allison held out her hand. It was so fragile that it seemed that if you touched it, it would fall apart into 100 little pieces. Allison, I'm from the land of demons. The dark-haired girl stared at the guy, who was silently looking at her with wide eyes. Nicholas came to his senses and also extended his hand for a handshake. Their hands touched. He grabbed her palm tighter, feeling the incredible strength emanating from her. The status window appeared above Allison's head again, and Nicholas saw the message. High-level cultivation talent copied. Nicholas, I'm from Linhai, he answered quietly and smiled at the corner of his lips, not taking his eyes off the girl's face. The clouds slowly floated past the roof of the Battle Pavilion Tavern, the wind gently swaying them, causing them to move in a slow rhythm. Please, sit down. Allison's voice was gentle as she gestured to the chair across from her. Thank you, Nicholas replied, creaking as he pushed his chair back. Only VIP clients can get up here on the second floor. Allison carefully poured black tea into the cups until the liquid filled the sides of the mug, a pleasant aroma emanating from it. But I'm just an ordinary commoner, not connected to any noble families. Why should I be a VIP client? Nick sat down at the table and folded his arms across his chest, looking questioningly at the girl. Yes, precisely because you are a commoner. The dark-haired girl answered quietly, holding the lid of the teapot so that it would not fall. And not connected to those noble families in any way, she sharply raised her dark brown eyes to him. Unlike the cheerful Nicole, her gaze is simply icy. Nicholas fidgeted in place from her gaze. Here is your tea. Catherine kindly poured the warm liquid into the guy's cup. I'll be honest with you, Allison began, raising the mug to her lips. When I invited you here, I personally wanted to invite you to join us. She placed a red cross on the table, in the middle of which was their signature flower, black. The metal, decorated with intricate carvings, shone brightly in the sun, its smooth surface reflecting the sun's rays. To our martial arts hall, Allison finished, folding her arms across her chest and crossing her leg over her knee. Nicholas's eyes widened, and his sister's voice flashed through his mind so gentle, Brother, join the martial arts hall. They were exactly 2 copies. Even their looks were the same when they needed something. Their eyes were wide open, like the cat from the cartoon Shrek. Damn! I could never say no when she made that face. Nicholas scratched the back of his head awkwardly. There's something I can't understand. The guy's fingers wrapped around the handle of the mug. Muhai is a huge city with incredible power. There is never a shortage of talented people in such places. He raised the cup to his lips, not taking his eyes off the young lady. Moreover, Nick paused, taking a sip of hot tea. I only recently became a warrior, he continued, narrowing his eyes. Our city didn't become huge because… The girl stood up from the table and stretched, kneading her shoulder blades. We had no shortage of talented people. Allison, clicking her heels, walked to the window. It's because we're always looking for talent. She glanced back at the guy, looking over her shoulder at him. Nicholas nodded and shrugged, thinking, sounds reasonable? I didn't expect such a young girl to have such a mindset. The guy folded his arms across his chest again and leaned back against the wooden back of the chair. Although what else would you expect from a warrior from such a big city? But my stupid sister would never have voiced such a thought. Why do you doubt? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Catherine's voice was heard, noticing Nick's thoughtful face. Even the elite of the big families strive to rise as high as possible in the Motai hierarchy, but Our Lady is not interested in them. The blonde raised her chin high, folding her arms across her chest. It's certainly a great honor. Nicholas closed his eyes, biting his lip. However, if I join any organization, I will be restricted by it. Once my ability is discovered, they will kill me immediately. So until I solve all the problems, I can't get involved with anyone. Exhaling heavily, he slowly raised his eyelids. Are you hesitating? Allison leaned her hip against the wooden surface of the table. But why? She folded her arms across her chest, looking at the guy sitting next to her. Sis, it's so hard to refuse this face. Nicholas glanced at the dark-haired girl with his dark brown eyes. Please tell me. She pushed herself off the table and stood in front of Nicholas, her hands on her hips. To be honest, I'm not sure. Nick squeezed his hand, which was lying quietly on the table. Take, for example, the rumors about the Iron Fang invasion. Big families went crazy, quarreling with each other. I just started to have a measured life. The guy answered calmly, looking down at his sneakers. So I don't want to be like them or serve their kind. The guy turned his nose up, looking at Allison. So that's who you take me for? She chuckled resentfully, leaning her palms on the table. And you, a friend? A smile played on the dark-haired man's face. You can watch me and then decide for yourself. Allison turned to face him, folding her hands in front of her. You don't have to answer right now, I can wait. The dark-haired girl still didn't calm down, looking intently at Nicholas. Her gaze, with her large brown eyes, scanned his tense face, while Nicholas's eyes looked more sinister, especially when his eyebrows drew together at the bridge of his nose. The boy walked along the concrete road, his steps echoing confidently in the silence. He held his red suitcase with one hand and kept the other in his jeans pocket as he walked past people to the gate. Above the gates, there was an iron coat of arms with an incomprehensible hieroglyph, which had already become quite prominent. Nicholas raised his palm and it sparkled with several blue sparks, showing his power. When warriors awaken their talents, do they remember their duty? Nick looked around, examining the men in light green uniforms. There were also women among them, but there were very few of them. Suddenly, children's laughter was heard nearby. 3 boys were chasing a soccer ball on a green field. The ball stopped with a dull thud near the black boot. "Uncle, pass me the ball, please," one of the boys shouted, looking at the 2 guards near the gate. Instead of helping, the black sole of the shoe began to fall onto the ball at a rapid speed. There was a loud explosion. The ball burst, and under the guard's foot, dust rose up, and a couple of stones flew in different directions. The boy whose ball had just been blown up opened his mouth in fear, and tears welled up in his eyes, while the 2 guards smiled wickedly. Nick stood on the roof of a multi-story building looking at the city drowning in gray clouds. The rain began to fall in small drops that gradually intensified. Not enough! Not high enough! I need to get even stronger! The boy thought in his head as the rain splashed his face. Suddenly, a status window appeared in front of Nick which said, "Successfully copied high-level culmination talent. Start fusion? Yes or no?" The next day, the sun rose high in the sky, illuminating the roofs of houses. Even though the sun was shining high, the corridor in the guy's apartment was dark. The door creaked open, finally letting light into the room. Nicole, I'm home! Nicholas exhaled tiredly, walking into the hallway. Brother, the girl exclaimed, hearing her brother's voice and turned towards the corridor. Her legs moved quickly between each other as she ran into the hallway. You're finally back! Nicole hugged the guy tightly, pressing her head to his chest. It's been 3 weeks since we last saw each other, and you've matured so much. The dark-haired girl looked at her brother with admiration, stroking his chest. Well, what's wrong with that? I became a warrior after all. The guy answered calmly and went into the living room, changing into his home clothes along the way. What? A warrior? Wow, we finally have a warrior in our family, the girl exclaimed, raising her clenched fists in delight. This is so cool! Your parents would be so proud of you! Nicole jumped up and down, still happy for her brother. Nicholas grins as he watches his sister, sitting on the couch, waving her arms back and forth as if she were holding pom-poms. Silly girl. Wait, your talent will awaken, and you too will become a warrior. Nicholas smiled, and his long bangs fell over his eyes. He saw his sister's status window in front of him, which was still the same as when he left. Human. Nicole, cultivation talent. Low, freezing talent. Newbie, not awakened. Okay, brother warrior, you better come here. The girl's thin fingers grabbed the scissors lying on the table. Let your little sister work on your hair. She waved the scissors in front of the boy's face as he tried to come to his senses after hearing his sister's words. Look at your hair. You look like a homeless person. Since you've become a warrior, you should look the part. Nicole also took a red comb from the shelf. Come on, sit down. Her thin palm landed on his massive shoulder. Nicholas sat down on a chair. A peignoir fell on his chest. I'm starting, the girl responded. The guy threw back, completely trusting his sister. Don't worry, especially since I'm the only one who knows how to do it. She smiled and got to work. Dark hair fell in chunks onto the wooden floor. Nicholas leaned forward slightly, giving his sister more space. How quickly time flies. After our parents died, Nicole always helped me with my hair. Zrenia, the guy pressed his lips into a thin line as memories flooded over him. A tiny, trembling hand held the scissors. Brother, I can't, whispered little Nicole, looking at the top of the head of the same little Nicholas. Why don't we just go to the hospital? The girl pursed her lips and her eyebrows rose, her whole expression speaking of fear. It's not worth spending money on treatment for such a minor wound, Nick muttered, and there really was a bump on the back of his head. Don't worry, I'm fine. Just help me cut my hair shorter and put a bandage on the wound. One of the guy's eyes was bruised, so it was very swollen. A compress was applied to his cheek, covered with a bandage. The scissors landed on the wooden floor with a loud bang. Oh, if only you had the ability of an immortal jellyfish. Component placement. Nicole wiped a couple of tears from her cheek with her small hand. An immortal jellyfish? What kind of ability does it have? Nick looked at his sister in surprise, and she quickly replied, Have you forgotten? You told me about it yourself. This jellyfish has the talent of recovery. After being injured, it can heal in the blink of an eye. Nicole squatted dreamily and propped her cheeks with her palms. The usual fairy tales for children. Why did you even believe this? Nick shouted indignantly, rolling his eyes slightly. You can't be sure. She's real. She's real, the girl exclaimed, looking reproachfully at her brother. Okay, Nicholas agreed, patting his sister on the top of her head. He had long since realized that it was useless to argue with his sister. I know you're worried about me. Maybe when my skill awakens, it will be a recovery talent. He lightly ruffled his sister's hair. There will come a time when no one will be able to hurt me and I will be able to protect you, Nicole. A smile played on the boy's face. Fuck! Immortal jellyfish! Nicholas exclaimed, breaking out of his memories. Don't move, or all this effort will be in vain, his sister said in a commanding tone. Suddenly, the dark-haired man quickly stood up from his seat and rushed forward, while his sister stood in slight shock. Where was the book of treasures that I recently bought? Running to the shelf, the guy took out a hardcover book from there. Squatting down and laying out the book on the floor, he began to look for the immortal jellyfish. Found it, he exclaimed as soon as his eyes found the right line. Immortal jellyfish, underwater monster, ability to restore, habitat, the Dead Sea. The guy whispered until he heard Nicole's words from behind. Brother, why are you talking to yourself? It makes me feel uneasy somehow. Nicholas was silent, thinking, If I can copy the recovery talent, then I won't have to worry about the injuries I received and Nicole won't have to worry about me all the time. The immortal jellyfish? You told me about it when I was a kid, didn't you? The dark-haired girl glanced at the book over her brother's shoulder. A fairy tale for children as far as I remember? The girl wrinkled her nose, folding her arms across her chest. No! Nick slammed the book shut. It turns out this fairy tale is real. He looked at his sister, smiling at the corner of his lips. Well, that's good. Now get over here so I can finish the haircut. And again that commanding tone of the sister, to which the guy couldn't say no. After some time, the haircut was finished, and the guy was walking around the room reading a book. Warriors the ability to improve their body through strengthening techniques. First, a warrior hardens his skin, then his muscles, and finally the last stage is strengthening his bones. His eyes carefully examined each line in the book. In an instant, the guy sat in the lotus position and placed his palms on his knees. Everything around him glowed white, and the guy closed his eyes, gathering all his energy together. We need to compare whether the progress this time will be as fast as last time. From the tension in his whole body, small beads of sweat appeared on the guy's face. I guess I should take a sip of mid-level monster blood and see the effect. He reached for the bottle that was standing nearby. Without thinking, Nick picked up the bottle of blood and brought it to his lips. He began to drink it, feeling it flow down his throat. A strong wind rose around him, fluttering his hair feverishly. Great! The process has been sped up 3 times. His eyes widened with delight. When the cooldown on my ability wears off, I'll head to the Dead Sea, but for now, I need to focus on cultivation. The guy exhaled deeply and settled more comfortably on the floor. The status window showed that the copy skill rollback would only occur after 30 days. We need to find the immortal jellyfish and copy the recovery talent. A wicked smile formed on his face. Surprisingly, the battle pavilion was quiet. People were leisurely strolling along the tents with goods. Nicholas's hand pushed the door open with a creak. He walked slowly into the battle pavilion. Welcome. Catherine turned to the sound of the door opening, smiling. Nick stopped, looking around. It's him. The blonde was surprised to see the guy again. That garbage man. Nicholas looked seriously at Catherine, who was standing behind the counter. Oh, you've come, Mr. Warrior. The girl waved her hand at him in a friendly manner, smiling. Are you looking for our mistress? The girl asked cheerfully and loudly. No, I want to buy things, the guy answered. Now his bangs covered his eyes, but his gaze remained as stern as it had been. He dressed up, and now he even seems cute. Catherine's cheeks turned a light blush. Excuse me, come in. The girl pointed her palm towards the counter. Do you have a map of the Lake of the Dead? Nick asked, approaching the wooden counter. Kat nodded and replied, Of course, just a minute. I'll find it now. A minute later, a map landed on the table. It was slightly worn and torn. Yes, that's it. There's definitely some great talent there to copy. Nicholas smiled to himself as he looked at the map. How much is it? The guy asked, looking up at the blonde, who glanced at the price book and replied, So, 100,000 wen. Nick handed the silver card to the girl without further questions. Watching the guy follow her, Catherine wondered. He wanted to rummage through the trash again, but in a new place? The lady said that there are a lot of terrible water creatures and ferocious beasts living in the Lake of the Dead. Even an elite warrior will have a hard time there. Her thin palm lay on her chest. The guy slowly walked away into the distance, his hands in the pockets of his trousers, only his brown raincoat fluttering in the wind. Like a bolt from the blue, Nicholas rushed over the hills. With a loud sound, he landed on the ground, sending small stones flying around. Only one lizard did not move from its place, even when the ground next to it began to shake. The Lake of the Dead was quite small. Everything around was covered in red colors. What a dreary landscape. I'll definitely copy this amazing talent. Nick straightened up and looked around. Broken pieces of tables and chairs were scattered around as if it were a dump. This place has been abandoned for quite some time. Strange atmosphere. It seems like danger is lurking around every corner. Nick shrugged his shoulder, sending 100 goosebumps down his spine. He looked around, putting his finger to his lips. In an instant, his eyes widened upon hearing a loud noise. A huge whirlwind suddenly formed in front of the guy, returning above him like a huge mountain. A monster? Nicholas immediately clenched his fists, spreading his legs wide, preparing for a fight. His brows furrowed as he realized that he was hiding and watching, only scaring the boy. At that moment, Nicholas summoned his shadow talent, disappearing from sight. He jumped high into the air, flying above the treetops. What is this? A huge ball sparkling with a multitude of lightning bolts opened up before the guy's eyes. Little by little, this ball begins to dissipate, and a silhouette can be seen inside it. "Take it! Madam, hurry!" shouted the man holding the open umbrella. Allison, flying next to him holding a huge yellow box in her hands, replied, "Let's do it together. Is it her?" Nick's pupils narrowed instantly upon hearing the dark-haired girl's voice. A huge monster emerged from the depths of the lake, opening its mouth, ready to swallow the man and the young lady. It's too late. The gray-haired man closed his eyes, either because he was scared or because drops of water were falling on his face. The monster's mouth closed, but Allison and her warrior managed to fly a decent distance away, saving their lives.